He's done it in a way that somehow it feels like it's chronicler's perspective, but
Mm,
technically it's not quite.
yeah.
It's certainly never close, and even when he's alone, it's outside him. It's the
Mm.
camera looking at him,
But at the same
but
time,
it's
wrapped in his tendencies in a way. Like it's very much
sure his
there's
language,
a
his sensibility.
yeah,
Yeah,
there's a tonal bridge between the omniscient narrator and the Quoth as
yeah,
narrator for his own story. There's not like a
yes,
disconnect where we jump away from it, which is very important because you have to have that flow between when you're drifting in and out, or you're going to break the immersion of the
yes,
reader from their meta perspective. It's
yeah.
really well
The,
calculated.
once in bed, it was a long time before he slept. It's very, very powerful, like use
Mm.
of the language, and so we do not know with anything like conviction what any of this means, but it's so clear how much it means, and like
Mm.
that's perfect writing. I just think that that's wonderful. So I
When
think
you've
it's a
only got
pretty perfect thing.
one
Yeah,
specific like what is it, 5 6 word line to complain about, it's a pretty strong opener, especially for a story of this scale and depth. I mean, this is
yeah,
a as we've talked about, this is a story that is unlike any other really, for how
for
it's
sure.
told and the kind of mysterious why behind its being
Yeah,
told.
yeah.
It's got a lot of intrigue to it. I'm very excited to see what
Yeah.
happens with the third book. Hello, ladies and gentlemen of the internet, and welcome back to Finalysis, Kingkiller Chronicles. I'm Callan. This is Matt.
Hey, everybody.
And today we're going to be diving into essentially before the story starts, right? That's how we're framing this one, Matt.
Yeah. Yeah, this is a chapter deep dive like we've done with the Song of Ice and Fire and some Star Wars chapters. Maybe by the time you've seen this, maybe even some Lord of the Rings or something. We're going to be doing this for a lot of different works, but today we're looking not at a single chapter, but the first 7 chapters of The Name of the Wind, which is book 1 in Patrick Rothfuss's Kingkiller Chronicle. This is, as you said, it is the story before the story, or the story before the start. For those that don't know what we're talking about, if you just like to listen to us talk about fiction, that's cool. You may be a bit confused. I would recommend
Particularly for this one,
maybe
I
being
think.
familiar. Yeah, I would recommend being familiar with the story before listening to us on this one, if possible. But if you just like to listen to us talk and you don't care about spoilers, that's fine too. But the story, the name of the wind, it's what do you call it? It uses the framing device of like a story within a story, and so there's a modern day inn in the middle of nowhere in a town that's called Nowhere almost. That's like one of the silliest, most over the top or on the nose puns that he uses. And in this sleepy little town, creepy things are happening, like kind of like on the horizon and off to the sides of things. And this living legend who goes by the name of Coat, but that's not his true name, has been hiding out for a while. And at some point, somebody that we know primarily as Chronicler or the Chronicler, and also by some other names that we don't understand yet, he's here looking to. He's been looking for Quoth or Coat, I should say. And he wants his story. He wants his life story. Um, and so at some point, after a little bit of an adventure with demons in the forests, not demons, but demons, because they're we're told they're not demons, but people think that they may as well be demons, so
I
they're
never know how
demons.
much to tell you people. This
Yeah,
is the great line there.
yeah. So after a little bit of a romp in the forest with some demon spiders, we're back at the Sleepy Inn, and eventually, Kvothe agrees begrudgingly. He starts telling his life story. So this is that
It,
bit before
it
he starts telling the
it's
life
funny
story.
as well because that was an excellent summary, but going back to one of the things that this book highlights, or the following book highlights, with the issues of translation, just describing it like that in no way captures at all the essence of how this story feels
Yeah,
to experience.
yeah.
Because
It's what
yeah, that was
happened,
exactly, you just described
but
exactly what happens. But if you just read that, you'd think, okay, high
yeah,
fantasy, not
very
very
weird. Yeah,
grounded and weird and quirky story about things. That the person was called the Chronicler, and a guy with 2 names, and one of his names is Quoth, and it's it it's very difficult to kind of get across the essence of a true story, particularly one of this style
mhm.
and nuance, without losing that kind of piece of understanding that you can only get really by experiencing it. To it, I want to mention, because you talk about how people should probably go experience a story before they listen to us talk about it.
Mhm.
A recommendation from both of us is that for this particular story, you listen to it rather than read it.
The
Obviously,
UK edition
yeah, and the UK
of the
edition
audiobooks.
specifically, yes.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people who praise the US narrator,
Yeah.
Nick Badal, um,
Yeah.
and if for anyone who enjoys that version, I'm more power to you. I'm glad. But yeah, in our personal experience, or in my personal opinion, the UK narrator, Rupert Degas, is, I mean, he's the greatest narrator of any book I've ever read. But on top of that, he fits particularly this character and this style. The format of this story, as you mentioned, being a character telling his story, literally describing it and narrating it to another character. It fits perfectly the form of audiobook in the fact that this person is telling you the life story. You're listening to it the same way that the chronicler is as he's writing it down. It fits perfectly for me, and
Mhm.
as we'll go on to talk about in a minute with the language and our enjoyment and an appreciation for the quality of the kind of melodic, lyrical nature of the prose in this story. If I'm being honest, I would not have appreciated it as much as I do had I read it and not listened to it. So I want to kind of get
Mhm.
that opinion across for anyone who wants to go out and read it themselves. I think you owe it to yourself to listen to this one if you can. It really
Yeah.
does embolden the power of it. The performance from the narrator is perfection.
So a few things. We have actually spoken about this series before. It was a number of years ago. That was kind of they're long videos, which is typical for us, but that's us actually going through kind of like the plot, such as it is,
Mm.
because it is another unfinished series. It's like A Song of Ice and Fire, where there hasn't been a new entry in a million years, and the author's kind of like out to lunch and might be going through some shit or something. So we don't know if it's ever going to be completed. But it's I don't personally have a problem recommending it even without that, because today we're going to be looking at the text and like examining the language, but very broadly, what I at any rate enjoy about this guy's writing is, I mean, the prose is pretty great. It's pretty great. There's times where I think it's a little pretentious, a little highbrow, a little over the top, but in general, he knows how to tell a story, and he knows how to
Mm.
string good words together, like pretty words, nice words, words that mean a particular thing when you put them in just this right combination.
And
And it
for the most part as well, even the pretentiousness fits the character it's telling the story. So he gets away with a lot that you wouldn't in other contexts. I agree that it sometimes even within that framing it gets a bit much, but he can stretch the bounds and has a great
Yeah.
tolerance for that. Owing to that framing, I think it works well.
Yeah, I don't so much love the pacing of these books, I have to say. But even despite
Definitely.
that, the use of language, yeah, like the use of language and the way that he entices the reader with his mysteries. It's at the edge of, you know, it borders on like rude almost, like to hold this much back from your readers for so long. Like his
Mm.
mysteries are so embedded in the story, so deeply embedded, and it's difficult to unearth them.
It's so prolific
But
as
it's
well. The
fun.
entire
It's
story
really
is
fun.
littered with them,
Yeah.
littered with really deep ones. So you go online and
Yeah.
find people talking about the mysteries and questions and ideas and theories, and it's rife with them. It's very much the case.
Yeah. And that's what I personally enjoy about, because I don't actually love the main character that much. I've warmed up to him over the years, but I still have major issues with him. But I also have to say there aren't that, compared to like other, say, like epic fantasies, which are typically characterized as like these long giant tomes with tons of stuff going on. There aren't that many characters, to tell the truth. There's a good amount, don't get me
Mm.
wrong, but compared to like other stuff in the genre, there's not that many characters. And so the strength of character is not really at the top of my list here. Not that he's bad with it. It's just it's not what I enjoy the most. It is the use of the language. It is the sort of magical, like borderline crazy, like sort of adherence to mystery, like the dedication with which he just pushes the envelope, man. Like in terms of like how you can keep your audience like raptured or captivated by telling
Mm.
them but telling them so little, really, after like the what 2,000 pages or so that we've
It's a
had
long.
total.
It
we,
is a
we
long
barely know what's
story.
going on. We do not really know why the series has the name that it does. For example, the King Killer Chronicle. we've met no king, at least not obviously. We might have, but
Yeah,
again, if we
we'll
have, that's a
possibly
mystery,
do
you
a
know.
video on the fact that we've refined our theories for this since we've originally talked about it. But yeah, it is one of those stories where if you take it out of one particular context of possibility for the third book, I mean, it's going to have to be like 4 to 5 times the size of the existing books to have it even a
Yeah,
chance of fitting in all the things that have yet to be discussed and
yeah.
talked about. It's a
And
strange position to be in.
the reason for that is because the framing device, the idea that he's telling the story to somebody within the story, he said that he needs 3 days to do it. One day for book one, second day is for book two. There's no way book three can all be in the third day. Like
Yeah,
that's what
it just
Callan's
can't
getting
work.
at
Yeah, it
there,
would
you
be
know.
imbalanced in
Yeah.
terms of how it's been told. And also, amusingly as well, because if you listen to an audiobook, the actual length is longer than that already.
Yes.
So obviously, you can complete handwave that away. That's not a problem for the author. He's not going to sit down and work out how long would it take to narrate all of this. But it's an amusing little quirk of the format.
So, yeah, that said, that's kind of like our recommendations for going into it, our sort of like summation of what it is if you don't know. I'm happy to have you listen to us if you just like to listen to us, but context is much, preferred for this. So if you haven't already, please at least read the first book. You don't need to read book two to understand what we're going to talk about today. Okay, so we're going to begin our look at the prologue, which is called A Silence of Three Parts. Now, this is a short little quasi poem that kind of opens up the story and sets the tone. We're going to look at every line of this, and then we'll be looking through the other chapters with a little bit more purpose, like just looking at sort of our points of interest there. We're not going to examine every line of the text through all of these chapters, but I think it's important to do this one here. For a few reasons. One, because again, the author Patrick Rothfuss, he's celebrated mostly for things like his prose, and this kind of, I think it's a nice little snapshot. I think that maybe this prologue reoccurs in. It's supposed to be in all three books. We only have two, but he's shared like the prologue for book three, and I think it's slightly different to this one. I imagine the second one might be a slightly different one to this one as well. But I'd have to be looking at them side by side to kind of see that. It was kind of like this funny bit where I remember seeing him like streaming the fact that he was going to share the Silence of Three Parts from book three, and he had like been working on it. I was like, isn't it just the same thing though, like each time? And I guess it's not. I guess he
No,
does
there's a minor
update them. So
variation. Yeah.
yeah. But anyway, so this is The Silence of Three Parts. We'll take it line by line. So the first line is, "It was night again, period." Now, I think it's a pretty good opening line because of the style that he's going for here. Really, the opening is two lines. That's technically the end of the first line, but it says, "It was night again, period. The Waystone Inn lay in silence, and it was a silence of three parts." So it was night again. The key word is again. Again makes that an actual sentence, not just it was night. Like it was night again. And it's got that kind of like an almost tired feeling, like
exactly.
right off the bat.
It's very light layer of dread and tedious.
Yeah.
It's somewhere between on the spectrum between tedium and dread, which is exactly the kind of initial tone he's trying to capture with this whole piece. It's a very intentional stylistic choice to establish the nature of the character, the nature of the story, the nature of the setting, even to an extent, in terms of how everything is very deliberate and rhythmical, and there's going to be a flow to this, and this is going to bring you in as a reader to, okay, this is the kind of vibe we're going for here. It's very effective in just 4 words, and before he even followed it up with this rest of the line.
I often feel that when like this isn't always the case, but I feel that a lot of, whether it's movies, a lot of works, whether they're movies or books or whatever, I think this is more common with movies though. People will often say, "Oh, you need to watch it a second time to understand it," and I think that certainly can be true. I think oftentimes it's somebody telling them. I mean, this is my go-to example. I'm sorry to even mention it, but I always think of The Last Jedi. We hated that movie, by the way. On the off chance you wound up here and you don't know our feelings on that, we hated The Last Jedi, and it's old news now. But that's my go-to example because everyone was telling themselves it's a deep movie. If you watch it a second time, you didn't get it the first time, but if you watch it a second time, you'll understand it. And I don't know. I think so many things aren't really that deep. It's
It's,
like
if
I
nothing
think
else,
you're
it's
telling
certainly
yourself something.
overdiagnosed.
It's a coping mechanism.
If it's true of certain
Yeah,
stories, it's by far, or it's far and away not the norm for the kind of complex stories people are usually
yeah,
referencing. Similar things like
yeah.
uh, oh, what's the word? Not the Matrix. The other one that everyone always calls needlessly complex. Inception. There we go. The other one being something like Inception.
Oh yeah. Oh
That was
yeah.
always the go-to example.
Yeah.
People saying
I
it's
mean, I
super
liked
deep and super
that.
complex. And it's like
I
it's a good film, but it's not complex.
Yeah.
I don't think so. Anyway.
I remember liking it. I don't even really remember. I only saw it once. That was the thing. It's
Mm.
like I liked it. I didn't love it. Yeah. Christopher. What's his name?
Nolan
The director. Nolan. Yeah, Christopher Nolan. That's kind of like his calling card. Is kind of
mm.
like
Concepts.
is he pretentious or is he genius or is he both? Like I don't know. But
Which fits
but
the
yeah,
tone of this
so
story as
many
well. To be
times.
fair, it's a
Sure, sure.
it's a fair
But this book,
levying here.
I, I I think it does. This lives up to it. I think I got so much more out of going through it a second or third time in some cases. Like there are bits of it I've been through many times. I've only been through the entire book about twice. But it was Night Again. I wouldn't normally think packs the punch that it does, but
Mm.
knowing what I know about the main character and the type of story that this is, I think that works really well.
It
And there are
fits.
many
It's
many
less a case
things.
where you need to watch or read or experience something a second time to understand it, and it's almost always more accurate to say to appreciate it. You understood it
Mhm.
the first time, but your experience is
Yeah.
enhanced on that second reread or
Yes, for
second run
sure.
through.
and and I'll be returning to that idea a lot today, looking through some of what we're going to look at. A lot of the things that are mentioned here, they take on new significance when you're looking at it, having already been through the story once already. Um, and that's one of the many reasons why I recommend this work because it's got that kind of complexity and depth, despite not being a finished series. But anyway, so it was night again. The Waystone Inn lay in silence, and it was a silence of three parts. The most obvious part was a hollow, echoing quiet made by things that were lacking. If there had been a wind, it would have sighed through the trees, set the inn sign creaking on its hooks, and brushed the silence down the road like trailing autumn leaves. That's one of my favorite sentences in this whole piece. Um, the silence of three parts is only about 3 or 4 paragraphs,
Mm-hmm.
really, but that might be the longest single sentence. I think it really works, and I like the fact that the sort of actionable things are all sounds. They're all
Mm.
noise making. Like the things that are lacking, that had they been there, like if there had been a wind, it would have sighed through the trees. It's making noise as
Mm.
it's doing that. It would have set the inn sign creaking on its hooks, and it would have
The
brushed the
brush, the
silence down the
silence, yeah, the
road.
brush, the silence in
Yeah,
particular. You think
yeah,
brushing silence, you think flowing leaves, you
yeah,
think it all matches the
yes,
tone of this being a breath of wind rolling through, which
yeah,
in a story that is so heavily tied to the concept of naming and like the true
hmm,
understanding principled name, the power of language. The fact that ties in something like the element of the wind, which is something that's traditionally
yeah,
associated with the magic of this world, and particularly the main character
hmm,
as well, his journey. It's all just laying the tracks down of expectation in the back of the mind. Nothing that's going to be concretely understood from the first reading, but stuff that's going to be in the back of your mind to be recognized and acknowledged. And it's kind of all of
yeah,
the brushstrokes of the larger tapestry here, mixing metaphors there, but are coming together to kind of weave together and explain that this is an intentional setup. This is not something that he's just doing for
yeah.
the sake of being artsy and prosaic. This is actually relevant to the core of the story.
Very relevant. Yeah.
Mm.
And then it says, it goes on to say, like, if there had been a crowd, even a handful of men inside the inn, they would have filled the silence with conversation and laughter, the clatter and clamor one expects from a drinking house during the dark hours of night. Clatter and clamor is nice in there.
Mhm.
It's a nice description. There's nothing sort of earth shattering about it, but it conveys the same idea. I don't like it as much as the the wind sighing and
Mm.
setting the sign going and brushing the leaves down the road and all that. But it's a good sentence and it builds on the same sort of rhythm.
And it's
And then it
also
says,
enhancing the scene setting as well. It's returning away from the slightly
yes,
prosaic and metaphoric style of the first line and
yeah,
bringing us back the crystallization of the scene back in mind. So,
hmm,
oh yes, he mentioned it was an inn. I'm not getting brushed
yeah,
away by the idea of the silence of the road
yeah.
and the creaking and everything. It's I'm now in the tap room with the
He's
people
quite
that would be there but aren't. So it's an absence. It's in reinforcing that concept of silence. It's really
he's quite
effective
good
there.
at doing that in this portion of the story. I think he's a little bit less skilled of it when it's the actual Quoth telling the story, because
Mm.
that's the first person sort of accounting of what's
Limitation.
going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, and many times it feels like he's going on about nothing, kind of, or it can feel that way at any rate. I don't feel it at all really when it's this more. It is a detached sort of um, omniscient narration. Like it doesn't particularly take place from the perspective. Chronicler feels the most close at hand, but even that there's a slight remove. Like he kind of
Mm.
is in both of their perspectives. You're never fully with Quoths in this in the entire story, really, aside from what he's telling you. But he's talking to you, the reader. You know, in these bits when we follow him around, it does feel like you're watching a film or something where the camera's following him. He's not.
Mm.
We're not actually in his mind. We don't know his mind. We're told objectively what's going on, but we're not in his mind. And this, it has that kind of it's setting up that dynamic, you know. Um, and then
And in
anyway,
particular as well, leading
this
into the following line as well, the fact that it
yeah,
draws immediately that bridge from visual, from the kind of
hmm,
that not visual but physical silence to the more traditional musical silence. Like he makes reference to the fact that this is now linking into the sound and what you would hear and the clamor and clatter and
hmm,
of if there had been music. But no, of course there was no music. In fact, there were none of these things, and so the silence remained. You know, it's jumping straight into the one of the core pieces of the character without ever mentioning it's
hmm,
related to that. You know,
yeah,
of course there was no music. Or why, of course, why is that something you're
yeah,
highlighting? It's very effective.
yeah. That, again, perfect example of you get more out of it on a second reading. Means
Mm.
nothing really. Like it just feels like scene setting at
Yeah,
first,
yeah.
but the second time it means everything to the character, because the character is a musician
And to be fair,
who
even on the
doesn't play
first
anymore.
time, because you spent the time reading this, the kind of the complex, nuanced nature of the paragraph, the way it's being set up, the way this is very clearly being chosen as the intro to this story,
Hmm,
that, and even from just the flow and the rhythm of it, you can see that this is a very carefully laid out set of words, and to the point where if there had been no music, and then to focus in, but no, of course there had been no, that's intentional. So even on first
hmm,
reading, you understand that is a point that's being
yeah,
made and something for you to pick up on. So granted, you understand it way more and appreciate it on the second reading, but that's not like
yeah,
it's not just scene setting. It does that as well and
yeah,
kind of in disguise itself amidst that intention. But it's going to
hmm,
have greater significance from just the first run through, in my opinion.
yeah. And in fact, there were none of these things, and so the silence remained. Now, what are those things? Music, clatter, clamor, excitement, conversation, laughter, wind. You know, like there's none of those things. You know, and if you take all those like together, that's kind of what the story is about. You know, like I mean, it's very very much telling you these are core like ideas to like what's lost, like what's been lost, like what was in the world, what should be in the world, what clearly should be in anyone's world that's not close at hand anymore.
Mm.
And with the whole thing of it was night again, like this is a pattern, this is like a constant state of being now. You know, like there's a problem here. Like it's building in your mind. Something has happened, and as relatable as all this is, there's no magic yet, no magic
Hmm.
whatsoever. But you can already tell there's something weird about the setting, so that's really cool.
And on that
And then
point
it
as well,
says,
we build onto that. So this
yeah,
is what the next few
yeah,
paragraphs are doing. It's raising that question for the reader of, something's not right here. But it's not just
mm-hmm,
a more mundane, human real life, not right. Although there is definitely that as well, because this is all speaking to the human condition more than anything else. But
mm-hmm,
on top of that, it's going to raise the question of a different kind of silence. Those extra levels that are more metaphysical than physical. Leading into
yeah,
that next paragraph.
yeah. So the next paragraph is fairly short, and it says, inside the Waystone, a pair of men huddled at one corner of the bar. They drank with quiet determination, avoiding serious discussions of troubling news. In doing so, they added a small, sullen silence to the larger, hollow one. It made an alloy of sorts, a counterpoint. Now, this is really good. Like, this bit here it's the last sentence is what makes it for me.
Mm.
You know, it made an alloy of sorts, a counterpoint. You know, it's why is this silence different from the other? Like, what do you mean silence of three parts? And you already expressed many ways in which, you know, the silence is lacking. Yes, but those were all different ways of describing the same silence, the hollow,
Mm.
echoing quiet.
The
And
absence.
that's a thing. That's a thing of absence. This one is being forged. It's man-made. It's a silence that we're bringing into being because we're avoiding the ways in which we might break the silence or fill it, and we're creating it with purpose because it's avoidance, it's fear,
Mm.
it's human, it's psychological, you know.
And all
So it
while
works
doing
really, really
this, all while
well.
doing this on the more practical level, you're zooming the focus of the reader in on the establishment of the fact that there are a pair of men here now. It's not just an empty inn. You've now zoomed in. Okay, there are two men huddled in the corner at the bar. You know, you're layering in all these visuals that just kind of fill in the background as a you know, scene setting, effectively, stage
Hmm.
setting, as you might call it for this particular story. Um,
Yeah.
and then on top of that, the language of the final line with the it made an alloy of sorts, a counterpoint. Everything you've just said is the main point of that line, but in addition to that, the vocabulary matches the kind of kind of prose and wording that we'll be seeing a lot through the story because of the character's nature. You know, alloy, a counterpoint. This is the kind of almost scientific description that you'll
Yes,
be getting and
because he
understanding from the
studies.
way he understands the
Yeah.
world around him. You know,
Yeah, the character has studied like metallurgy, and that's part of
mm,
the magic of the setting. And also, counterpoint is a musical term. So
yes,
he's talking. Yeah, it's
doubly
calling that
relevant.
back into yes.
Yeah.
So it's almost saying that the silence is musical. There's a music to this silence, and it's there's something harmonic about it. It's not
Mm.
just one, you know, like just one silence. You're adding this other silence to it, and you're creating this counterpoint. We're getting into language of like melody and music and everything, rhythm. And so then it says, you know, the third silence was not an easy thing to notice. And I really like that. I like
Mm.
that almost more than the way in which he describes it. But it's that sort of you don't quite get where I'm going. That's okay. You're forgiven. Just stay with me,
And
kind of
how
a thing.
might you
Like
if you were
yeah,
careful? You know, how might you if even if you were really paying attention? Ooh, how would that work?
yeah.
Immediately jumps into that with the next line.
Yes. And he goes, if you listened for an hour, you might begin to feel it in the wooden floor underfoot and in the rough, splintering barrels behind the bar. It was in the weight of a black stone hearth that held the heat of a long dead fire. Personally, that's my favorite line of this bit.
Mm.
And then it goes, it was in the slow back and forth of a white linen cloth rubbing along the grain of the bar. And it was in the hands of the man who stood there, polishing a stretch of mahogany that already gleamed in the lamplight.
It's
There's
all
a
kind
lot
of
there.
collectively speaking to a soullessness. You know, that quiet,
Yeah.
almost imperceptible feeling that it's all the motions are being gone through. The sounds are there. The feel is all there, but there's no soul. There's no spirit. There's no joy behind it. There's no
Yeah.
warmth, comfort. You know, it's sucking all of those ephemeral, invisible, untouchable things that we just take for granted as we walk through life, and highlighting
Yeah.
how they are there and not felt. You know, speaking to that larger void and
Yes.
absence that's been built up by the other two paragraphs.
Yeah, that going through the motions, that doing a needless chore, it's a surface that's already gleaming. The choice to call it a stretch of mahogany rather than just a wooden bar,
Mm.
you know, polishing a stretch of mahogany that already gleamed in the lamplight. And it's lamplight, you know, like remembering it's dark outside, you know, it's like you feel that you feel like what you're looking at, it's warm in here because there was a fire. The fire's not there anymore. The fire can't be there. The fire would break silence. You'd
It
hear that popping, crackling
it's
of wood
all
and
it's all
everything.
kind of clinical
Yeah,
notation without using clinical
yeah,
language. You know, it's not
yeah,
it's very difficult to capture that feeling because you can do clinical
yeah.
feeling with clinical language very easily. Obviously, you know you can distill it down to the very basics and express the kind
Hmm.
of disinterest, or just disinclination towards any of the art aspect of it. To kind of show what the character's perspective is, but before we even get into the character's head, we're seeing all of that through the you know highlighted, noted absence of caring. It's you know it's not
Yeah.
a warm hearth, or the warm glow of light from a nearby flickering candle. It's just a lamplight. You know, it's
Yeah.
very well done.
It's there's a sense of it's a kind of thing that you rarely see described in books, I feel like, or at
Mm.
least the ones I've read. It captures the feeling of stepping inside the place. Like there's a difference between when, like, say the weather was slightly cold outside, and when you first come in somewhere, there's a distinct feeling. You're taking off your coat. It might be a bit wet. It's nice and warm in here, and then there's a difference to how you feel in that moment to how you've been after you've been in there for like an hour or so, and you start thinking about what's making the room what it is, what's the atmosphere of this room, and it is warm in here. Why is it warm in here? Oh, I'm sat next to a hearth, but there's no fire. It had been going, that kind of a thing, and you feel like you're bringing in like your noise and the things that would break your silence, but then you start kind of maybe feeling a little unwelcome in doing so,
Yeah,
and so
something's
you
wrong
become a
here.
part of
Something
the
isn't right.
silence. Yeah, yeah, you join in with the silence.
Swallowed up by
So
it.
then it goes. This I think is my least favorite part of the thing. This is the description of the man. This is the main character, and there's nothing wrong with this, but I for some reason I've never quite loved this line. It says, "The man had true red hair, red as flame. His eyes were dark and distant, and he moved with the subtle certainty that comes from knowing many things." I don't know why, but there's something about that I just feel. I feel like that meant something to the author. You know what I mean? But I don't really. It doesn't mean anything specific to me. There's something about, without knowing anything about Kvothe as a character, this line I feel like it doesn't help me. It's what do you mean knowing many things? Like, and you can see that in somebody. Like, I mean, what does that mean?
See, I
You
didn't
know?
have that feeling personally. I didn't think this stood out to me as a fantastic line, amidst the rest of the
Yeah.
of the piece. It kind of blended in with the background, as it were, of the quality, which is very good of this intro. But yeah, no, I didn't. It didn't flag for me as being any lesser personally. It's hard to pin down, as with so much of the prose in this kind of story, because it's the whole point of language and naming, and the core truth of things, isn't it? But that kind of the mood with the subtle certainty that comes from knowing many things, just that particularly on second reading, building onto the nature of Kvothe, I think that that speaks to kind of the idea that I'm confident in knowing.
I think if he had been
It's
doing
very hard to put
something,
into words.
I
I know what he means when I'm looking at this, basically, but it's tricky to describe it, as you say.
What he's doing is so mundane and everyday, and his heart's not even in it. Like, he's just set that up super well, but suddenly he's got the subtle certainty of knowing many things. And I just like, to me, it almost breaks. It kind of fractures the rest of the portrait that he's painted for me.
To an extent, it kind of adds to the intent of the fact that this is a silence that he's built, though. It kind of works into the idea that this is a manufactured, built, alloy counterpoint. That aspect. It kind of plays into the fact that he's got this sense of knowing many things, that sense of having the control. That's what I think more than anything else is. It's the fact that this is controlled, this is considered, this is intentional. I know what this cloth is made of, how it's put together. I know what the material I'm wiping over it is, how it affects the wood, the treatment of it, how that wood was cut down and carved. And so, the kind of that's seeing the world for all of its component parts rather than just taking it in as a whole. I think that's the kind of thing that it speaks to a bit.
I guess. I mean, if it was me, I could tell you this. I would be hinging on cutting this line for some reason. It's never sat with me. But you know what I like better? And what you're saying, like was we didn't mention it, but in the previous paragraph, when he was describing the silence, the third silence, when he talks about all the places where it's being held, like the black stone hearth and in the wiping, right, of the bar, the polishing. He says it was in the hands of the man who stood there, like he's holding the silence, right? Like that, I think, is a much stronger part of this painting than moving with the subtle certainty that comes from knowing many things. And the only thing that means to me on reread is the fact that we're told that's what Kvothe's name means. It means to know. And the character is quite pedantic, as I think is also the author, right? So it's like, but it's just not a thing. I just can't buy that you would see this in somebody. Maybe it's something that
I think it is as simple as, and perhaps not really as powerful, which is fair. But I think it is as simple as just when you see someone with great confidence and great surety in themselves, they move with purpose. They move with, there's no wasted effort. There's no things are considered in a way. I don't think it says much more than that, which is fair. That's perhaps the biggest criticism. It's not doing that triple layered heavy lifting that the rest of the intro is doing. And particularly, and as well, it's paired with, not forget the first line, with the man had true red hair, red as flame, which is a perfectly serviceable introductory description, but it's nothing you haven't seen 1,000 times before. So because I think it's paired with that, it kind of takes you out of the kind of, this is impressive writing, to the same level the rest of it has been. And particularly, just as a note as well for the following up, I prefer the description of his hair later in the chapters when it's talking about it. It's just red, really, just red hair color, like that line to me. I loved
Well, is that
the kind of step out of the
yeah
prosaic
that
into the simple to kind of show the mundanity of it, to show the fade of it, to show the contrast.
that's almost another topic though, because his appearance notably and noticeably changes many
Mm,
times. Like the way that people describe the color of his eyes or the vibrancy of his
mm.
hair.
In tandem with that
It
vibrancy of spirit and that fits the moment. Yeah,
Yes, there's
exactly.
something, yeah, like so that was clearly done with purpose. But this, I don't know. I'm happy to agree to disagree on it. I
Mm.
don't think I like it, but I
Let
respect
us know in the
your
comments what you
point of
think.
view on it. Yeah.
I'm curious to see if that
But
resonates
then
with anyone else in a particular way. That could be someone's favorite line. So I'm
it
curious about
could
that.
be. But then we get to the bit that does contain my favorite line, and also the one that I'm a bit baffled by. You probably can guess the latter. But anyway, so it says, the Waystone was his, just as the third silence was his, in reference to the man, right? So the Waystone was his, just as the third silence was his. This was appropriate, as it was the greatest silence of the three, wrapping the others inside itself. It was deep and wide as autumn's ending. It was heavy as a great river-smooth stone. It was the patient, cut-flower sound of a man who is waiting to die. So it was deep and wide as autumn's ending. That's my favorite line in this
Hmm.
whole thing, this whole opening bit.
That's
I love
beautiful.
that.
Doesn't even really mean anything, but it's beautiful. It's so you
I
so
feel like
know what it means.
I feel like I understand what that means far
Mm.
more than moving with the subtle certainty of knowing many
But
things.
but
Like
that's
like
the
it was
strength.
deep and
That's the
wide as
strength of
autumn's
the whole.
ending.
That's
Like
the strength of the
that's
whole story,
poetry.
though, because yeah, exactly. Because it
Yeah.
doesn't really mean anything, but you know exactly what it means. That's very tricky to capture
It's it's
as
it's
effectively as
just
this and fitting the
it's
flow. It was deep and wide as autumn's ending. Like it runs off the tongue. It's
yeah. Yeah.
beautiful.
The Waystone was his, just as the third silence was his. This was appropriate, as it was the greatest silence of the three, wrapping the others inside itself. It was deep and wide as autumn's ending. It was heavy as a great river-smooth stone. It was the patient, cut-flower sound of a man who is waiting to die. I don't know what cut-flower sound means, and that's always a little bit bothered me. What do you think it means?
That to me has always been the kind of literal snip of a bloom cut from a flower. Like it's just the
That's what I've pictured, but I always
yeah.
felt like, what is that? Is that a sound? Like, I
I
mean,
think
is it?
it's the kind of the sense of execution. It's the sense of inevitability, the sense of finality, the sense of just gone. You know, it's the thread of fate being cut, that kind of thing. I
That is the
think
sound of, like I mean
I don't know. That's
it's
what I personally took from it. That's how I feel whenever I hear it. And also, regardless of meaning, I love the flow of it, the cut flower sound like that. That's one of those things where in another
I feel like
work
it's
and
his
in another
most original
context.
sentence, in like maybe in the whole thing. That's one of his most like original constructions. I've never read those words
Mm,
together like that. That's purely him. But
I
it's
think
always
that's
been like, is this pretentious, or is it, or does it work
I
and I'm
don't
stupid?
know. I think
I
it's one of the
can't
things where
tell how I feel about
the
this.
justification of the flow itself for me is enough, even if it didn't, even if it's lacking meaning. Which again, if I'm reading it wrong, that's what I took from it anyway. But even if you
Yeah.
put that aside, the cut flower sound of a man who is waiting to die has such beautiful flow that I'd be willing to forgive a lack of meaning for it. You know, for that level of strength.
Because it's like I'm okay with the idea that like there's just no definitive meaning, but I
Mm.
do feel slightly like the director who passed away recently, famous director David Lynch. Somebody once asked him to explain something, and he said no, just like that. And it was the perfect like response. And I would be perfectly fine if Rothfuss said that to me if I said, "Can you explain that line?" But it's just I think the fact that I am asking this question and always have ever since I read it, it's like, what does this mean? And like, I don't know if I like it or not. I think that makes it objectively interesting. It's an interesting line. It's certainly interesting. So I feel like it's like to me more questionable than the prior line I called out, but it doesn't bother me the same way. That's purely a taste thing, I think, more than that, Like, but anyway, so that's the silence of three parts. And the reason why we kind of belabored this is again, it's a use it's a picture, it's a portrait of like the language on display here. These This story is not plot driven. I think that plotting is not his strong suit, but it's also a very clear choice. Yes, that's what I'm getting at. It's also a very clear choice to tell it in a certain way. I disagree with that way, but I mean, if you like these words, if you enjoy the sound and shape and texture of any of these words, these books are long and they're full of nothing but language like this. So that's the reason why I wanted to look at them so well. And because I think it is a nice little, it does something that you can only really do in a book. You can't do this with film. You can't quite do it with music. It needs, it requires language, like, and not cinematic language, not the constructions that are involved in making a piece of music. It requires the written word, and it kind of requires a sound, like in texture and shape and understanding of what the words mean and what they don't mean. They're very particular, you know. So if you like this, and you've never read this story and you've somehow listened to this for this long, this should entice you to keep reading. But that said, we're now going to dive into the other chapters and kind of talk about, yes, the language, but also the sort of the business of what is going on from scene to scene. Okay, so chapter 1, A Place for Demons. This is where I half jokingly said that a demon spider kind of shows up, and that's kind of what gets the
Kind of
ball
is what
rolling.
happens.
Yeah, and as you kind of alluded to, that's not really what gets the ball going, because the story is certainly not about a demon spider. That's just kind of one component. I've always felt like the author couldn't quite decide how he wanted to open the story, you know? And so he kind of like, it feels like he has like 4 or 5 different openings that he's strung together, like, so we're getting them all. It's kind of like the end of like the Lord of the
Is
Rings films. You're getting
Yeah,
all
in
the endings.
reverse. Yeah, he's kind of breaking
Yes.
from convention in that, but it's one of those things where if you have the understanding going into this isn't going to be a plot driven story, this is going to be very much a kind of similar
Yeah,
to how he talks about
definitely
when he's
not.
describing the character, I mean, of Quoth, when he's describing the fact that this isn't going to be like a tale as it's traditionally told, because this is my life, this is real, this is true, and true
Yeah.
stories
Yeah.
seldom take the straightest path. So once we get to that point, you're fully on board. But at this stage, we haven't had that kind of groundwork laid out, so it's purely based on the style choice of the opening of the Silence of 3 parts, purely based on how these lines flow, is about to jump into in a minute, in terms of the scene setting, in terms of setting in, to give you that idea of, okay, I'm sitting down in this place and I'm experiencing this as it happens, rather than this is a traditional tale where the author is following certain design tropes and mechanisms to kind of leverage you into the story. And once you go in and accept that, it's a wonderful ride, a winding, nebulous, straying and wandering ride, but it's a ride nonetheless. But you do kind of have to have that to fully appreciate that, I think.
It's certainly, just to underscore what you said, it is not a plot driven story. I have issues with the pacing of the story. I have issues. I think plot is definitely like his I would go so far as to call it his weakest point, or like his trait as an author. Like it's not what he excels at. Now, a part of it is certainly by design, as you were just speaking to there, but I just feel like I have like an active sort of disagreement or disagreeance. It doesn't quite agree with me, like the way in which the story unfolds. Sometimes there are bits of it that just feel more obtuse than others. There are some that feel a little bit just out of place. And granted, we don't have a complete story,
full
so
context.
maybe
We don't know how
would,
much of that's going to be like, oh, I see what he was doing. There's so much of it that he's kind of holding over us until that third book comes out as like a potential genius mark.
But it is not plot driven. It is very much story driven, and plot and story are not the same thing. The way he's telling this story, the devices he's using to tell the story, those are what are engaging. The plot is all over the place, at least in my opinion, and it was very unclear. And I'll kind of speak to that a few times looking through this chapter, like what I was supposed to be paying attention to the first time. Very little of this bothers me now on a subsequent reading, but the first time I felt very lost. Like, I was I've spoken to you about it in the past before. Like there came a point the first time I was going through it where I had just gotten into like the troop, and he was just telling me about like his parents and stuff like that. So that's fairly deep into the book. Like it's deep into the intro, right? You've been through a significant chunk of book by that point. Is a better way to say it. It's still at the beginning of the story. And you asked me, because you weren't sure where I was. You said, "What do you think of like the Chandrian?" And I was like, "The who? What? I don't think I've heard of them. I never heard of the Chandrian." And that's the first thing in here. You know what I mean? It's like it's the first thing you're being told about. And some of it is that it was a made up word, the Chandrian. It sounds great. I like the sound of what he gave, of the name he gave them, but that kind of stuff doesn't click with me automatically.
You
I
need some
need
time to sit with it, don't you, and probably
yes.
assimilate the concept. Because
I've
I like the fact when he goes into it later on, the actual language behind it. Chan meaning
yeah.
meaning seven, etc. The idea that
Mhm.
it's part of the language
It's
of the
got a
world.
kind of a
Very
disputed
clever.
meaning, yeah.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
some
exactly.
characters are
Yeah.
not quite sure what it means, yeah.
But until you get
But
all of that, until you get the chance to
mhm,
see them, to experience them, to know the language, of the etymology of the word,
yeah,
it's all just it's another fantasy word that may never have any
sure,
relevance. It could just never come up again. So
sure.
ignore it, move on.
Sure,
Yeah.
completely. But it's like, I've spoken about the fact that I mean the listeners are going to think I have like a hate boner for Brandon Sanderson, like, yeah, and it's almost true. But like I love the man. He seems like a great guy. I
Mm.
don't care for
Very
his
good
words
teacher,
very
from what I've
much.
seen online as well.
Good teacher, sure. I just don't like his written word. You know what I mean? But I don't. I also don't begrudge him his success. He seems like a guy who deserves what he's got.
Mm.
And he's really engaging with his fan base and his readership and everything. He seems like a good person. But the reason I bring him up is because it took me like 5 or 6 times to get through The Way of Kings. And the first time it was like an open and shut thing because it opens with some guy who's like a demigod or something super important that I don't really remember what he is really.
Some guy.
It reminded me of the opening of the Wheel of Time, the very first book of that. It was the first scene is very similar structure, but it's some guy at the end of like some climactic battle, and he's circling what he calls circling the body of a dying thunderclast, and I'm like,
Nope.
nope, don't know what that is. Don't like the word, can't picture it, don't know
Mileage
what it
may
is. It's
vary.
some giant beast. Yeah. So the Chandrian was not that. It didn't annoy me like that. It's just I didn't focus on it. And I'll say that a few times. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to focus on the first time I was reading this book. This chapter intentionally treats the main character Kvothe, who's going by a different name in this, at first, is it kind of treats him as an interloper in this scene, and that works when you understand what the point of the story is. When you understand what he's doing as an author, all of it works. But the first time, I felt like I didn't know really, and even with him being teased as like this is his story, it's his silence and all that. I forget these details, or I forgot the details as I was moving through the story the first
Mm.
time.
I
But
remember
just
when
to
you were
look at
going through
it,
it the first time, that kind of frustration carried through for quite a while as
yeah,
well. Like once you have to kind of go into this accepting that this is not a plot driven story.
yeah,
This is going to be a sink and feel as though you're there story. This is going to be like a watching life pass by story in a very real way.
I have to admit,
Um, that
yeah,
rather
I
than
want
like
to
kind
admit
of
something.
specifically plotted out and okay, I'm going to hit this beat here and this beat there, etc.
Yeah, I want to admit that I'm like Goldilocks here with like the porridge and the three bears or whatever, and it's got to be just right because I don't want the author to be holding my hand the whole way. That's my issue
Mm.
with Sanderson, big time. I feel like he over explains everything that I'm not interested in and withholds the details that I would have questions about. But things that are just like obvious to me, I feel like he beats me over the head with.
Mm.
This is not holding my hand, and I appreciate that. But at the same time, the first time going through, I thought it might be Chronicler's story. I thought that Kvothe might be only one of many characters that we're supposed to be caring about.
Mm.
I thought that we would get a lot more just definitive answers about certain things, and it just became increasingly clear that wasn't going to happen after a certain point. So it was just like I wasn't sure what the story was going to be for a very long time. And again, that's one of the reasons why I personally enjoy it far more on subsequent readings.
Mm.
It works much better for me on a second reading than the first time.
And I don't disagree with
But anyway,
any of the kind of critical notes there either. That the
yeah.
style leads into inviting to that confusion really. But also I never had
Uh-huh.
that experience my own self. Like I when I was listening to this the first time, I it took me a few pages of listening to get the whole order of things. But I never felt that I was confused about where it was going to be going or what the kind of style was. So whether or not that's just something to do with like the differential between our experiences with the fantasy at the time. You've read a lot more fantasy than I have at this point. But at the time, you were newer to the genre, so that might have had something to do with it. I don't know, but like you said as well, this is he does play with the conventions and get away with a lot that you don't see in other stories,
Yeah.
other writers.
It's very unusual. This is a
Mm.
unique mix of ideas that he's combining. It's very unorthodox. It's very it feels sort of signature now. It feels like his
Mm.
style. It feels like he knows what he's doing. I don't want to I don't want to convey the idea that this guy's a hack. That's not what I'm saying. It's just it's very when I didn't know what to expect, I didn't know what to pay attention to for
Mm.
like a long time, you know. But to give an example of stuff that I think works very well with him sort of uh, sprinkling in details and just allowing you to pick them up as you will. the first line of this chapter, I think, works really well, where he says, "It was felling night, and the usual crowd had gathered at the Waystone Inn. 5 wasn't much of a crowd, but 5 was as many as the Waystone ever saw these days, times being what they were." Times being what they were is an important phrase that it'll appear on this very page again, but it keeps coming out, coming back over the course of this chapter. It means something, but I really appreciate felling night because that's calling to mind the idea of the time of year, the season, the harvest, autumn, and at the same time, they also use it as the name for a day of the week. And there's also a different word for week, which is span, and he explains what that is too.
Yeah, and it all comes across very naturally. Like he never has to explain that to you that's what's happening. You won't understand it the first time necessarily, but when it's been reiterated later on and it comes up in a different context, I see. Felling night is like Thursday, or whatever it happens to be.
Yeah.
Very effective that way. You mentioned as well times being what they were. Repeated but never ever done. Love that. He hit just the right balance because it's very easy to get that that kind of repeated deliberate style choice to overdone, make it feel like it's stayed past its welcome. It doesn't happen here, largely because of the number of uses, but also the fact that it's used slightly differently, the context shifts, and the meaning behind it, the purpose behind it is very deliberate, very intentional. It's trying to set this stage of the modern status quo in the world, how we're supposed to feel about things. This is times being what they were. It's not normal. This is not what should be the case. And everything about this scene setting is going to be reinforcing that.
Yeah. There's also it continues. I like the description coming up of Kvothe, even though he's not called such. But it's also a great description of Old Cobb as well. He's the one kind of doing the business of the scene early on. But I like how Kvothe's in the background, and he feels like he's not the point of it, and at the same time he's being called attention to. It says, Old Cobb was filling his role as storyteller and advice dispensary. We both love that line. We've talked about that before. Yeah. And then it says, the men at the bar sipped their drinks and listened. In the back room, a young innkeeper stood out of sight behind the door, smiling as he listened to the details of a familiar story. For me, I feel like I can see that, like it's a comic panel or a still from a film, like a really well done, just a really well framed shot.
We've talked before, it's very cinematic, but which isn't something I use to describe this book very often. Which would normally be kind of a criticism. We want to see this kind of cinematic, these visuals kind of crystallized for us in the wording, so we can all have this shared experience of, okay, this is what's being, this is the intent, this is what's being shown to us. But the story is not that kind of story. I mean, you've mentioned before, it's very much like a kind of stage play experience, more of like a holistic sitting.
When he actually starts telling the story proper, I feel like curtains are parting, and I'm watching, like when he's introducing us to the troupe and everything, which is they're actors, so that's really fitting. But it feels very much as though the curtains have parted. You've had like the guy coming out, "Alas, thank you all for gathered here," whatever, blah. And they're kind of like, "Thank you for joining us on this night when, oh dear me," and then like they scuttle off stage and the curtains part, and then something happens. It's like, okay, thanks, town crier. Let's get to the actual story.
And it's
That's
funny.
what it feels like in that moment.
It's funny because I never visualized that even the slightest, but I know exactly what you mean. It's got that kind of theatricality to it, which fits the character, of course, because that's what Kvothe is. He's a trooper, so he's all about that performance, and it comes up a number of times throughout the story that he is most comfortable on a stage. So it's setting all this imagery up. It's setting up this idea of theatricality and performance. It's not just and then the story moves into this, we fade to black and we're now onto the story part. He's telling you the story and it feels as such.
And that insight there isn't required. You don't need to understand that that's what Kvothe is for this to work, but the fact that he is smiling as this old man is performing a story, it just means a little bit more once you learn Kvothe's background as a actor, as a performer, so it is nice.
Perfectly sets that and lays that track down for you.
Yeah,
but
so
the line "Old Cobb," the Old Cobb part, though,
advice dispensary.
Perfect single snapshot sentence. I mean, Old Cobb. Immediately, you slap "old" in front of a simple name, and you know exactly what you're talking about visually in your head. Okay, I've seen someone who's earned that kind of moniker. Filling his role as storyteller, that could be just, he's doing it for the night. Maybe they take it turns, whatever. But the second you say advice dispensary, okay, this is the guy who's always sat in the corner telling the stories. This is the character we've seen time and time again in other things, and in real life. We all have encountered someone who's like this, or got at least a piece of this with them.
Sure.
Nothing we learn about him after this fact in any way changes this, and you don't need it to. This is who he is. I mean, he's Old Cobb. And he does his job for the scene, as you say.
Yes, and he's doing the old man thing. The narrator's great.
Mm.
Rupert Degas's version, where he's going, "When he awoke, Taborlin the Great found himself locked in a high tower. They had taken his sword and stripped him of his tools. Key, coin, and candle were all gone.
All very
But that
specific.
weren't even the worst of it." Yeah, because that weren't even the worst of it, you see. He pauses for effect. Because the lamps on the wall were burning
Burning
blue.
blue.
Yeah.
All
But
very specific choices by the author there.
the
Key, coin, and candle.
key
We don't
coin
know the
and candle.
significance.
Yeah, it's just it comes off like a nice, great piece of alliteration, which is
Mm.
always good. But it's also, and to be honest, I don't know precisely, even having read the books, how he would have used them. But you
Mm.
know that they can be used for magic. The more you learn about the way magic and like all the implications of his system work, you can imagine different ways in which these could have been useful and how sort of naked and bare he should be feeling, or his enemies would expect him to be feeling if he's robbed of them. So
Mm.
key, coin, and candle, and you'll even see the coin. For example, like a coin is used to do something in this very
In this
chapter.
very
Like,
chapter, yeah. I hadn't
yeah.
even clocked that, but yeah,
So
good point. That even in
yeah,
the very
yeah,
chapter we're talking about here, that comes up immediately as part of the kind of magic of the
yes,
world. And magic is perhaps the wrong
yes.
word, which is something that we'll get to later on. But yeah, effectively, for all intents and purposes,
It's one.
magic.
It's yeah. It's one of several. I mean, the characters and setting don't necessarily think of it as
Mm.
magic, but it is magic. And there are different versions of magic.
Yeah, because it
Yeah,
doesn't
different
feel
layers of
like
magic.
magic. It feels like
Yeah,
science when they do it, and not in a boring, cold, clinical
naming
way.
feels like
Yeah,
magic. Yeah,
naming is
naming
magic.
is magic.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. He play in terms of the narrative systems, framing. He uses soft and hard magics within his world, and
Hmm.
that's always been my sweet spot. I love it when it's used both, because to me it makes the most sense
Yeah,
within a world. If you have magic, it
sure.
will be made into science if it can be, and therefore you
Yeah,
have different tiers.
I actively dislike just pure hard magic for the
Mm,
most part. Like, I think that's
likewise.
another reason why Sanderson, I won't say he's wrong. It's just not to my taste. His magic is quite hard, or at least
Mm,
the what I've seen of it, it skews in that direction. He can explain why something happens. And to me that I won't say that again. It's not wrong. It's just
mm,
not to my taste. I like things to be to the other side of it, if not entirely, then at least on that side of the spectrum, closer to
mm.
that part of the gradient. But anyway, so Cobb peered closely at the newer, more attentive member. Oh, sorry, I skipped a bit. We're not going to go through this whole thing line by line, but
Mm.
this is just important for talking about the way in which the author's constructing things. Graham, Jake, and Shep nodded to themselves. They're the ones listening to this story. I like this description a lot. The three friends had grown up together, listening to Cobb's stories and ignoring his advice. Listening to the stories, ignoring his
It's
advice.
got a nice
That tells
charm
you
to it.
everything you need to know.
Mm.
I do have to say that the fact that they're all named, I think that they could have gone unnamed personally. The chapter feels like it's kind of about the group and their town as a whole, like
Mm.
overall. Clearly, Quoth is at the center of it, or that becomes clear eventually. But this is one of the reasons why I had trouble focusing. I was not sure, is this a story about this town, and eventually we're going to be in like each and every one of these people's heads? Is it about chronicler? Is it about the present, or is it about the past? These characters, I feel kind of overloaded when I start a book and I've got too many named characters all in one scene.
Mm.
And so for me, this is not wrong, but it's stretching at the seams. I would not say that this is an objective thing. This is a me thing, but it is one of the reasons why I had trouble focusing the first time.
In
And
this
with the exception of Shep,
context,
these characters don't do anything
yeah,
really.
exactly.
Shep, something happens to Shep, but the
Mm.
others not really.
And that's fine as well. Like, that it doesn't have to have
Yeah.
anything happen to them, but because I think to solve this problem for people who have that kind of same flavor appreciation as you, is if you just take the names out here and instead involve them with the dialogue. So you only learn the names when they're
Mhm.
talking in dialogue. I think it takes away some of that kind of narrative expectation confusion that could be coming in, that you could be bringing into this, if you've
Yep.
been submerging in other stories that kind of follow that more traditional that traditional style.
Ironically, the character who is most important, aside from Cobb, out of this group, is the upcoming character who's the boy who isn't
Mm.
named until later. Eventually, you get his name. I want to say it's Aaron, but he's part of the
Yeah,
he's
Aaron.
he's the Smith's apprentice, right? And he's
Mm.
he's part of one of my favorite chapters of book 2 with the ring poem. He's the one that Quoth is talking to about that. So
Mm.
eventually we'll talk more about
I
an
forget the
Aaron
ring
scene.
poem is book 2. Yeah, it's so far in, isn't
Yes, it
it?
is. Yes,
Yeah,
it
it's
is.
because
It's one of
obviously
my
it's in the
favorite
outer
bits.
world.
Yeah,
In the modern world, it
yeah.
feels more recent, yeah, more early. Yeah, true.
Yep.
It's beautiful for
Yeah.
that part. I love it so much.
Beautiful. I can't wait. We'll talk about
We'll
the
get
ring
there.
poem some
We'll
other
get there when
time.
we get
Yeah.
there.
Yep. Yep. But anyway, yeah. So the boy, is not really a boy, and I like the way that he expresses that, because do you know what that meant, boy, in reference to the blue flames that are burning,
Mm.
and the author explains, the narrator, I should say, says everyone called the smith's apprentice boy, despite the fact he was a hand taller than anyone else or than anyone there. Small towns being what they are, he would most likely remain boy until his beard filled out or he bloodied someone's nose over the matter.
I
So that
love that.
tells,
It
the
all adds
setting.
to
So like,
the
yeah,
setting of the town. It tells you the
yeah,
small town vibe, that kind of close knit
hmm
country experience.
yeah.
Yeah, it's
And the last one to
perfect.
enter it is a stranger
Yeah,
forever.
exactly. Which is having grown up in a village, by the way, very true experience. Not in the hostile
Yeah,
way, but just in like a
yeah.
we know ourselves. We've known each other forever, and we haven't known you forever, and it's going to take some time to bridge that gap. It's
And he's
very
been
true
there
to
far
life.
longer than he's been there far longer than Quoth, who's only been here for like a year,
Yes,
and he's set
yeah,
up shop
and
here.
and it
So it's like it's
later
his
it references
place. Yeah,
that he's only been here for a
yeah,
year, so he's not quite familiar yet. I love that it makes it
yeah.
clear that that's it's in modern context that sounds ridiculous. A year, you don't know
Yes,
him after a year, but it fits
yeah,
the tone of the setting and the era it's part of perfectly. And anyone who has
yeah.
that experience, or even an allusion to the understanding of that, will
Hmm.
immediately capture the entirety of what's meant there in that one line.
Yeah,
Rothfuss is so very good at kind of capturing the essence and the feel of something with very small amount of page space and in line
sure,
work, which is important because a
sure.
story that's all about naming and the power of language, you have to have
Yeah,
the
yeah,
understanding of that nuance and that I mean, frankly, magic to
yeah,
sell it, and he really does. It's my favorite thing about the whole book when we talk about prose.
yeah.
That's the power and the meaning I mean when I'm talking about it.
It does. I feel like in terms of plot, I really do think he does stray, despite the
Mm.
fact he told us he was going to,
If
or
I
if I
seem to
seem to
stray, I
stray.
seem to wander.
But his use of language always feels very intentional and done with
Mm.
purpose. He's the words mean something. They always matter. Um. Anyway, so the boy gave a slow nod in answer to the question. The Chandrian. That's right, Cobb said approvingly. The Chandrian. Everyone knows that blue fire is one of their signs. Now he was, and then they're interrupted. He's interrupted by the boy, and that devolves into like a nice bit of just natural, sort of dialogue flow of
Helping.
bickering about what's the point of the story. You get the tone of like what these characters' daily life is like. We're not going to go through all of that word for word, but it's very nice.
Helps
Um,
reinforce who these people are and where they live and
mhm.
what they're about, etc. And the point that we're trying to get to here at the end.
Yes, and I'd like to say, so at some point they cut all that blather off by kind of shouting, like to the room at large, "Oi, we're thirsty men in here," So
Yeah.
they want another round of drinks, and I like this description far better than the one of knowing, like the subtle art of knowing many things or whatever. I like this description of Koth a lot. I really love this. It's as mundane as can be, but it's very charming, and I think it hits the nail right on the head. It's perfect. The innkeeper appeared with 5 bowls of stew and 2 warm round loaves of bread. He pulled more beer for Jake, Shep, and old Cobb, moving with an air of bustling efficiency. I just think there's no, they're all humble words, but they there's no $5 words in that. They're all simple, and you get that sense of movement. He's got all 5 bowls. He knows exactly how many people he's serving. He's considerate. He also doesn't shoot back with like a, "Yeah, I'm coming. I'll get there when I get there." He just kind of he lets that roll off of
Moves
him.
out of that
It's
clockwork.
yeah,
It's all
bustling
routine.
efficiency.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah. So and this is a nice sentence too. The story was set aside while the men tended to their dinners, setting the story aside.
Mm.
It's nice. Old Cobb tucked away his bowl of stew with the predatory efficiency of a lifetime bachelor. You can understand what that means. He hasn't had to have nice manners sitting down with like a wife or even just entertaining company very often. It's kind of a little bit indecent almost, but you put up with it because it's Old Cobb.
Mm.
The others were still the others were still blowing steam off their bowls when he finished the last of his loaf and returned to his story. So, got to get back to my story. Got to do
Yeah.
my job. Yes, and they know he's like that, and they take their time. It's very, very nice. So the story about this figure to Borland the Great, we can just brush over it a little bit. We don't need to go through all of the like every line of this, but this is very clearly sort of a blueprint, kind of like a sort of a star of destiny, showing you like here's what magic can look like in this setting. It feels like fantasy within the fantasy. Like, is this real? The characters don't really believe this, do they? They might not. But this is teeing up what is later referred to as storybook magic, which refers to that heightened version of magic. So yes, there's magic of a more mundane sort, like sygaldry and sympathy, and these are inarguably magic. We
The
can't do them.
sciences of magic, yeah.
But in their world, they can explain that. They view it more like a science. They can explain it. Naming, though, no. That's what Borland is doing. For he knew the name of all things, and all things were his to command. That's magic. Even to them, even in this setting, that's magic. That's wizards. That's wizardry. You know what I mean? That's sorcery.
And the storybook magic description as well. I mean, I use that magic in life. That is beautifully put. It's because everyone knows exactly what they mean. It's storybook magic. It's something that's in stories. It's something that's only out there. It's something that's only. It's not real. It's only from stories. So that when you do encounter it, obviously it's magic anyway. So it's magic for its own sake, but it's also got that kind of mythical feel. When you invoke the word myth, it means something just by itself. It's very powerful.
Yeah. So you have this whole thing of like
Borland
the Great. He doesn't. He is charming, yeah. To Borland the Great, he doesn't panic. He breaks his way out of this. He escapes with very little, he's almost unscathed. And it's like, why was that? Maybe it was this. Maybe it was that. Maybe it had something to do with the amulet he was wearing under his shirt. Now, this kind of just feels like it could just be part of this story. It's very clear what that is now. Once you've read both books, you know precisely what that is. Was it called a gram? How do you pronounce it? Yeah, a gram. So if you've read the story, you already know what that is. If you don't, just know that it will be explained, and it's setting that up in a really artful way. They sort of ask about the amulet and how he got it. Now, this brings me to the first thing I have to admit to, like as an embarrassing American, the accent that I was listening to. The way that Brits pronounce R's at the end of words, I thought this was saying tinka, like Tinka, not tinker, like a tinka, like tinka. Like I'm like, what's a tinka? And I'm picturing like a little goblin or a gnome or something, and they're like, there's rules for how you gotta treat a tinka, and I'm like,
to be fair to you, you were just coming off the back of an Abercrombie binge at the time, so you were used to Shanker. So that it would have been evoking the same kind of imagery. To give you credit there, but yeah, no, didn't have that myself. I was just thinking Tinkerer from that.
This is a me thing. Like no one. I'm sure that this has never happened to anybody else. But so I didn't understand what a tinka was. Like I was like, I don't know what that is, but I knew that there were rules for it as they dole out that and this is interesting. We should talk about this. So to Borland the Great was given this protective charm from a tinker that he met on the road, right? And the story of that is pretty simple. It's he shared a meal. He sort of went out of his way to break bread with this guy. Didn't need to do that. And it's not just like that such a thing brings you good luck, which is what the friends kind of tee up with their reading of it. It's a more involved. If you do it wrong, there are consequences, if you don't treat the tinker well, or tinker kind of well. So they argue back and forth of how the saying goes. They say, a few days earlier, Borland had met a tinker on the road. And even though Borland didn't have much to eat, he shared his dinner with the old man. Right sensible thing to do, Graham said quietly to the boy. Everyone knows a tinker pays for kindness twice. It's like, no, get it right. A tinker's advice pays kindness twice. And then this is the first time Quoth speaks in the whole book. He says, actually, you're missing more than half. Instantly, the pedant has to come in the pedantic as hell, like you're missing more than half. But the way that the narrator says it, he says it with humility.
Yeah,
he does say it well. He says it perfectly.
All of these lines are said perfectly for me.
Like actually, you're missing more than half.
But it's
actually. You're missing more than half. Like he says it quietly.
Kind of like a smile to it, like it's familiar.
Yes.
But also putting aside the performance, because again, that's technically outside of the book. But yeah, I do love that.
Yeah.
It's also specifically noted afterwards that this is the first time he's interjected. So why has he done that? This is important to him. So that immediately calls back to so this specific piece has some sort of significance, either to him as a character or to the setting, or both. Even if it's just the tone and
there are many reasons it objectively has significance, and there are many reasons, and like many different reasons why. Like I mean, you think of just the fact that he himself has met many tinkers in tight spaces in just over the course of his adventure, but then you also think to stories about how the moon was stolen and who did that, and things like that. So it's very, very, very meaningful, and it's one of those things that takes on new meaning once you know the rest of the story, which is still unfolding. We do not have a complete story, but it's very clear that this is thematically important.
Actually, we're missing more than half.
Yes, we are. At least that's the strong suggestion, But anyway, it says, a tinker's debt is always paid, once for any simple trade, twice for freely given aid, thrice for any insult made. So very nice. He's good with little. I love poems like that. I love little poems. I love poems about magic rings. I love poems. I write them in my own fiction. I don't actually like poetry, but I like little limerick kind of like poems like this. A lot, just like simple rhymes and everything. They just linger in the memory. They stick really well. I like that. I like that one a lot.
It's cool to mind
like
as well,
actually
the
does mean
association
something.
with that as a truth of life as well, because we come back to the Chandrian later on in the chapter with the same kind of lyrical memory aid. The point of you'd be surprised at what's hidden in children's stories, or children's rhymes. It's the same.
And he
kind
also
of thing.
And he kind of has it both ways, because at some point in these chapters he also warns against taking too much of a story, like buying into it too much. You got to be careful with stories, so there's truth and also something else in there. But anyway, so now that amulet was worth a whole bucket of gold nobles. So again, it's letting you pick up the fact that that's a form of currency. It doesn't explain to you exactly. But on account of Terborlin's kindness, the tinker sold it to him for nothing but an iron penny, a copper penny, and a silver penny. It was black as winter night and cold as ice to touch, but so long as it was around his neck, Terborlin would be safe from the harm of evil things, demons and such. So again, just part of the story at first, but then when you find out what that actually is in the context of the setting, it's like it means something more. And then, and this is nice, but again, this is Shep. He goes, "I'd give a good piece for such a thing these days," Shep said darkly. Now, if you know what happens to Shep, that's good foreshadowing. It's quite subtle. So that's not something you're going to catch on the first reading, Really cool. I don't have too much to say about the rest of this story. It's consistently great use of language. It does sort of tee up a lot of the ideas of the Chandrian. We get the use of things like the name Telu, which is one of the names for God in this setting, or like one of his incarnations, I should say. I don't really understand precisely what the religion or religions are and how they break down.
It's one of the things we talked about in the large description as well. He's one of the most. First of all, this is all very economic. This is. He's using the minimum possible amount of language to introduce and reinforce these characters, what they're talking about, the setting, the tone, the theme, the vibe, even just everything. He's doing it with the smallest amount possible to give the maximum amount of feeling you're there and feeling you're present and feeling this is a rich and lived in world. But in terms of his actual well-being as a whole, compared to other fantasy authors and of his pedigree, basically. He's a very shallow world builder, but you never once feel it. It feels like a lived-in, extremely deep, extremely rich setting, despite the fact that he only ever gives you the kind of just a skimming stone across the surface. Very, very difficult to do, and it speaks to kind of the power of the little runs like this, where it's telling you stories, telling you, Taylor's choice of the path. That's religious in note, just from the description right there. You don't need anything else around it, but he's giving you a touch of that larger context and the character's reaction and all that stuff. And he carries that all the way through the rest of the story, but both books. Very, very powerful.
Yeah. So this is interrupted by the appearance of Carter. Like the story, it kind of loses its way where people are arguing about the meaning of it and everything. And then Carter, who's another villager, storms in, and he's the one who's been attacked by this demon spider out on the road. In fact, his horse, Nellie, was killed by the thing. And he's brought its corpse, or is it a corpse? Who knows? Like with him in his sack, and he kind of like plunks that, down. I really like the way that all of that is described. I didn't really have any individual lines teased out for appreciating all of that. I think it all works. My favorite detail of it is, again, it's just all these little things that make it feel like you're watching something. When he tries to roll it out of its sack, it kind of gets snagged at first, and he has to kind of shake it to get it to fall out. Just little things like that make it seem like you're actually watching something. It feels very natural. Good choices for when to break the action with the description and when to get back to the business at hand. It's very well done. So we've been doing an awful lot of praise here. There is one line in this that I actively dislike, and I don't get it. So it comes at the end of this passage, right? So after that, they've dumped out the thing in the bag, and it was a spider as large as a wagon wheel, black as slate. And they're all looking at it, and it says, "The smith's prentice jumped backward and hit a table, knocking it over, and almost falling to the ground himself. Cobb's face went slack. Graham, Shep, and Jake made wordless, startled sounds and moved away, raising their hands to their faces. Carter took a step backward that was almost like a nervous twitch. That's all fine. And then it says, silence filled the room like a cold sweat. Like a cold sweat? The silence is filling something like a sweat?
Yeah, I never quite clocked that one.
I
Never registered. I was visualizing more of the scene itself rather than listening to the prose at that point.
love his language.
Yeah,
right?
that is a bit of a weak one.
And particularly with like the silence. Like this to me, I would cut this. I would never. I don't understand it. I don't feel like I know what that means.
Yeah, I agree. Like even if it was like silence dripped like cold sweat, or with cold sweat, something like that to make it more of an action.
You don't know,
rather
sweat
than like
doesn't fill something.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Right?
It doesn't work properly. I never noticed that. I was focused more on the visuals when I was listening to that rather than the prose. Yeah,
in all 7 chapters that we're going to look at today, there's nothing I actively dislike like this. This is the one line where I'm like, nope, I don't like that.
Yeah,
Everything else is at worst questionable, or I'm not sure what it means, like when I talked about the cut flower sound. But I mean, the cut flower sound, I think is fascinating. I question it, but it's fascinating. And also, this is me. I kind of forgot this. It's just coming to me. But the Kfe's tree in book 2 there's falling flowers. So it's like that kind of works for me. It means something in the context of this story, maybe. Yeah. But this, you're not going to fill a room with sweat.
You're right. That is actually a clear flaw there. Compared to the rest of it, it's a big drop down in quality. I didn't caught that before.
But I like to move on to something I do like, because these things are called Scrael. Now, I just ripped Brandon Sanderson for hitting me with Thunderclast or Stormclast or whatever the hell it was called. I just didn't like it. It wasn't to my taste. I'm picky. I'm very picky. I'm like Goldilocks. It's got to be just right. If you're going to make up a word, it's got to be easy enough to say. It's got to be memorable. It's got to not sound too much like something else. Scrael. These things are called Scrael. That's how you refer to one of them. Or scraling, I think, is how you refer to one. Scrael is kind of like a plural already, but that works for me. It feels like that's what you would call this thing. So I like Scrael. That was just like a thing I wanted to bring up.
It evokes imagery as well. Scrape, scratch, it's got some strength to it.
Scuttling around like a spider does too. Yeah, Scrael,
exactly.
I like it.
And just the fact that it's an S, when it's a spider, that small thing, but it makes a difference. Your body can accept it more.
They go out of their way to point out that it's a spider, but it's not a spider. It hasn't got eyes or a face or a mouth. Inside, it looks like a mushroom, which is a funny description.
And Fo's doing most of the description here as well. He's doing like the kind of scientific examination of it, which tells you something about his past, something about his personality, something about his
and they call that out.
Exactly.
And he has to lie. Yes.
Why is he lying?
And that's one thing.
All of this is being laid, and it's a multi-purpose scene. It's not just, and here's the inciting incident. This story is about going to be how he fights demon spiders. No, it's about what's different about him to the rest of the town. Why don't they know the difference? What they do know.
This is how you know he's This is how you know he's one who knows many things.
Exactly.
Because you can learn that about him, but I maintain you can't see that about him. But
that's
exactly. Okay. That's okay.
All he says is Scrael. I had thought the mountains. That's it.
Yeah.
That's all you. Right there. He knows something about this. He knows more than he's going to let on, and he's confused about it. So there's such economic strength to this in terms of how little he's giving away.
And there's also I know how you meant that, like the writing economy, like the economy of setting the scene, but also it explains something about the economic woes, because this is why this is one reason why trade is heavily reduced, as we're told at length in this chapter, and it's because the roads are dangerous. And at first, as the men inside the bar thought, it's because bandits or thieves or roving bands of bad men might hold you up on the road or do worse to you. No, there's worse things out there. There's things like this. There's magic afoot. There's something dark out there, and you're never actually given an actual description yet over the course of explanation. I mean, over the course of these books, exactly why this is. But clearly, Kvothe is at the center of it. So if we ever get a conclusion to the story, we'll learn more about that. I don't have too much about the rest of this scene. I do really like the way in which they test whether it's a demon, and
Mm.
that involves the coin that we mentioned earlier. I like that scene for a lot of reasons. One is just the fact that he's carrying on. Okay, key, coin, and candle. Here's a way in which you can use a coin to do something related to magic. You learn about candles later when you know that you need sources of energy to do sympathy, fire. So I think a candle can take you a long way in this world if you know the right things, the right methodology to use magic. So, and even though they don't even have to tell you that, you can just infer it based on what the things that the ways in which they explain how magic has worked. So it's just really nice. But this is a kind of a mundane way. I don't even know if you would say that Quoth's doing any magic. He's just doing something adjacent to magic with the coin, to a thing that is magical. You know what I mean? So it's also nice in which they kind of are all. This is how like the perspective that we're given of like this kind of third person omniscient or like sort of detached, narrator. He's not in Quoth's mind, but at the same time, he, she, whatever, the omniscient narrator, I mean to say, that sort of neutral voice knows far more about Quoth than they're telling us. And at the same time, they're keying us into what we need to know, but they're also bridging the perspectives of the villagers, which is why I thought maybe they might be more important than most of them end up being, because the way it's described, it's like, this doesn't happen here. Like, you don't run into a demon here. Stories don't happen here. Telu broke them, with his hands and sent them howling into the nameless void. Your childhood friend didn't stomp one to death on the road to Baden Brit. That was ridiculous.
Stories happen to other
that's
people.
Great.
Yeah, it's a beautiful description.
Yeah, very, very good. And that's when Quoth, or Coat, which is his fake name, which is a nice choice because there's many reasons why that's cool. One, it sounds like his actual name, so he won't fail to respond to it and obviously out himself as that not being his name. But also, and this is the kind of thing that as much as we say that the audiobooks are great, or at least the UK edition that we love, we keep harping on about that, and it's true, it is great. Certain things are visual clues. Coat, K-O-T-E, you can see it spelled there. Later on, much later on, one of our favorite teachers, Kilvin, he screws something up, and he's Keldish. He speaks a different language, and he says something, and coat is one of the words he says, and I think it means disaster. Like when he explains what he did. So he's chosen a very, very
ominous name.
Ominous name, like his sword that we'll talk about later is called Folly, for example. It's like he's chosen a name that he's named himself for the disaster or something like that. His sword is called Folly. It's all like this parade of failure. Everything. It's that self-hatred might be a little harsh. What's the word? I can't think of how to describe it. I'm not eloquent today, but you know what I mean. It's like he's very, very
kind of melancholy about it.
Melancholic, but also with that sense of like ownership for the problem. He blames himself clearly
Somber?
for a lot of what's wrong.
Yeah,
somber. But anyway, so it's a good choice of name. But Coat here he
it's
wants.
Also just
he says this
level.
one.
It's a basic mundane piece of item. You just throw it over. It's an old coat. You throw it on the rack. It's
yeah, but it's not spelled that way.
No, for sure. But just the sound
it's not
of
spelled
it.
that way at all.
The sound of it though it evokes that kind of imagery as well. So it's got that.
He doesn't have coats. He has cloaks. You know better. He has cloaks. You don't have coats. He goes on monologues about how great cloaks are. But anyway,
he's right about those. I'm with him on that 100%. The worst thing that the Victorians ever did, get rid of that fashion after thousands.
The way he went on about the cloaks, though, it was like, it almost feels like everyone has a cloak in this world, right? Like he's like, yes, but you don't know how to use your cloak. I know how to use cloaks. It's like, that's how it feels to me, So it's like, yeah. There's one way to tell for sure, arguing about whether it's a demon. He said, reaching into his pocket, iron or fire. He brought out a bulging leather purse. In the name of God, Graham pointed out, demons fear three things: cold iron, clean fire, and the holy name of God. The innkeeper's mouth pressed itself into a straight line that wasn't quite a frown. Of course.
Well, of course.
So it's like, we don't care about like whatever. Like the person who has studied magic and all the arcane mysteries has no use for God. So that's interesting.
He does that a few times throughout the rest of the chapter as well. He does a few
Yeah.
times things like you know your business, and I think you're wise,
Yeah.
sir. Like
Well,
he kind of gives
okay. That's coming up. Hang on.
mm,
Hold on to that one. But so for me, it's like I don't know if God doesn't exist or if he doesn't approve of God. It's hard to say which,
mm,
like whether everybody's notions of gods are off. So we'll maybe we'll find that out someday. But anyway, what you're talking about is right here. So the innkeeper's mouth pressed itself into a line that wasn't quite a frown. Of course, he said, and as he emptied his purse onto the table, then fingered through the jumbled coins, heavy silver talents and thin silver bits, copper jots and broken halfpennies and iron drabs. This all confused me that once upon a time, because like the currency, I was just like, I don't care. And money is such a thing in these books, which I was not expecting the first time I picked it up. Does anyone have a shim? Just use a drab, Jake said. That's good iron. I don't want good iron, the innkeeper said. A drab has too much carbon in it. It's almost steel. He's right, the smith's apprentice said, except it's not carbon. Use coke to make steel, coke and lime. The innkeeper nodded deferentially to the boy. You'd know best, young master. It's your business after all. Now, my question is, did he get that wrong on purpose so that he doesn't come across as too educated?
I would not be surprised if he got it wrong by accident because we know about Quoth and his preferences. But it would be interesting to see how that was the case, given everything he knows about the things he knows when it comes to metallurgy and stuff.
It feels like he forgets things that he shouldn't, given that he remembers literally everything.
Yeah, for sure.
So it's like I don't know. I think I've been what I have in mind is how many times he lies over the course of these chapters that we're looking at, and it's quite a lot actually. I'm not sure if this is one. That was a question though.
Yeah,
no.
Well, it's difficult to tell because obviously part of the mystery among many millions of mysteries in the story is how much of himself he's lost or shrouded with his stepping away from his true name. And becoming Coat instead of Quoth. We don't know how much that's affected him. Whether or not this is a dip of, oh yeah, I do know that, but I messed up, or I'm just lying to preserve the guys, like you say.
He's already told obvious lies to the audience, but that are passable in here. Like, oh no, I don't really know what this thing is. I've just heard stories, but we know he knows what they are.
Yeah.
He breaks off a piece of the thing and he keeps it, and he lies to Bast about that. So but he keeps it for a reason. I think it's implied to be like these things can track it. Like that's how he's able to gather them to him in the forest later. It never comes out and says that, I don't think, but I think that's the only obvious conclusion. That
clever bit of explanation there without it, explicitly stating it. It's very clear that's what happened.
Yes,
just from the reaction.
I like the description of once the thing breaks from the iron being pressed against it. I like the fact that magic has many textures, but he often is careful with smell. Smell comes about a lot in terms of like things that have this weird otherworldly magical quality. When the thing breaks, it releases a scent. It's like the room was filled with sweet, acrid smell of rotting flowers and burning hair. Burning hair, that specifically, the Chandrian leave scenes that leave that scent behind, but the fact that there is no burning hair here is just that smell, so it's kind of like, in my mind, the Chandrian, when they do their thing, oh, someone's hair burned, but like maybe not, maybe that's just Chandrian smell. You know what I mean?
Sure. It's also quite evocative traditionally of death anyway, because burning hair is a symbol of quite a horrific death a lot of the time.
That's what I mean. Sure. Yeah, of course. That's what I thought. I literally thought it was burning hair in that scene, like when the troop goes up in flames, but it might not have been. It need not have been,
Yeah. And as well, this the follow-up line as well that kind of summarizes the tone of the scene and the setting, which puts the coin down on the table with a sharp click. Well, he said, brushing his hand against his apron, I guess that settles that, which is all fine. But the perfect thing is, what do we do now? Like that is such an ominous background, kind of lulling sense, like set of tension for the reader as he turns to the rest of the group, leading into that kind of hours later time skip, to kind of show it's a business as usual step away from the status quo simultaneously. For him, this is just okay. Well, what's the next task? What do we do now to solve this problem? When everyone knows that this is crazy, this is nuts, this is a step away from even the dangers we thought that were on the road. This is demons in our home. I love it. It's beautiful.
I the first time I felt a little jostled back and forth in terms of time because we don't actually see that, but we're told about it later. We kind of like the end of the chapter circles back around to what the answer to that question of what do we do now, but the next bit is skipping ahead of all that, so we don't actually see the answer yet. and it's just him by himself, and he's kind of having a reflective moment. He's closing down the inn. I'm not going to read every line, but it does explain his name, like or his fake name. He called himself Coat. He had chosen the name carefully when he came to this place. He had taken a new name for most of the usual reasons, and for a few unusual ones as well, not least of which was the fact that names were important to him. So that's what you were mentioning
great
there.
paragraph, such an important one as
Yeah.
well. That is, I love the way that describes a new
Yeah, that's
name for
central
most
to
of the
everything.
usual regions,
Yeah.
and for a few unusual ones as well. Not the least of
Yes.
which the fact that names were important to him. That is such a
And also
small, succinct
changing
summary
names,
of
it
both.
means something in this.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah. Which is again one of the many millions of mysteries that we never get explained beyond that. It's just Elodine is panicking, and it's like
yes.
Elodine is panicking, and that
Yeah.
tells you exactly what
Yeah.
you need to know about that later on. There's a
Yeah.
huge Titanic problem,
Yeah.
and yeah,
Yes.
this is all setting up the background expectation of, has he changed his name, or is he just shrouding it? Is it just a mundane changing of names? Is it how much of his powers are affected? Is that because of the psychology of him feeling himself diminished, or is he physically magically diminished? We don't know anything. It's all
Yeah.
going to be hopefully
No,
explained in the some coming third book.
that's by far the most important paragraph of this group of three that I'm about to do. But I like the whole thing. Like, he called himself Coat. He had chosen the name carefully when he came to this place. He had taken a new name for most of the usual reasons, and a few unusual ones as well, not the least of which was the fact that names were important to him. Looking up, he saw 1,000 stars glittering the deep velvet of a night with no moon. He knew them all, their stories, and their names. He knew them in a familiar way, the way he knew his own hands. Looking down, Coat sighed without knowing it, and went back inside. He locked the door, and shuttered the wide windows of the inn, as if to distance himself from the stars and all their varied names. Very beautiful, the whole thing, the entire thing. In the deep velvet of a night with no moon is beautiful. But the way that the meaning of everything is there, and it's also a nice way of avoiding that tired cliche of letting out a breath without realizing you're holding it or whatever. He sighed with,
yeah, one of the
he sighed
most
without
commonly
knowing
used
it.
cliches in all of fiction, I think, that one.
Yeah, he sighed without knowing it. So it's the same beat, but with language that's specific and appropriate to the. And he's often done this, like, depending on his mood. One of the silences, one of the most, one of the ones that's called attention to with, of course there was no music. That's so in your face, like, of course there's no music. But many times, depending on his mood, he's humming, or he even sings at one point, which is striking. It's very striking. Yes. So it's like
striking for the fact that
idea
it's
that
not
it's
called
not
attention to as an exception as well. It doesn't even address the fact that he was realizing it was bad. That's quite
he doesn't
powerful,
realize it.
Yeah, that's just that alone is a shining point of contrast to show, oh, he's feeling joy here. It's genuine.
Yes.
It's not a something that immediately tamps down with realization of the truth of the modern age, with the exception, of course, of the man recognizing him. That throws a damper on it, but that comes later, and it's not tied to the music, whereas every other time it's immediately tied to the music itself.
Yeah, and at the end of all of this, it's buttoned up with that, actually, because I won't read it all, but there was a description I don't want to pass over. I like the one that he's straightening up and cleaning up, and it doesn't really need cleaning. And so it's like, at the end of an hour's work, the water in his bucket was still clean enough for a lady to wash her hands in. That's a nice description. But then at the end of all of this, while he's doing all this, polishing, wiping this and that, cleaning this, he even hummed a little, although he did not realize it, and he would have stopped himself if he had known. So it's like, he's... Why would he do that? It's a nice question to be left with. Like, why be so against the music or the humming, or why maintain the silence? What's wrong with you? Because he's not particularly angry, but you're left knowing something is clearly wrong. What is lacking? What is the silence of things that are lacking? Why are they lacking? So it's very, very good. Then he kind of retreats to his sort of upstairs sort of apartments or whatever above the inn. This is the introduction to Bast. I don't have too much to say about this sequence other than it failed to make any impression on me the first time I read it or was listening to it. Bast was just another character coming in. I was like, okay, whatever. And I did not key into the fact that he's a fae creature until much later into the story. I was a bit bemused by Bast.
It's interesting because I didn't have any issue with it on first reading, but on return, repeat reads or listens, however you want to call it, this scene is not the scene I remember as being his introductory scene. It's perfectly serviceable, but there's nothing wrong. In fact, it's objectively, theoretically better than some of his other first early moments for introducing the character and the dynamic and the relationship between the two.
I choked on my tea. I hope you didn't hear that. But I
No,
was
no,
going to
it's
say, what
fine.
is the scene that you remembered? Like,
The scene being it's like a note.
oh,
You leave
yeah.
me with like what am I, some
It's,
dockside
I,
whore, that kind of thing.
he was.
And
I thought he was a woman at that point because of the way the original narrator was doing his voice, and I had failed. I had failed to like remember his pronoun was he to everything, and I was just like, okay, here's this. Is this his wife? And she's angry that he left the house and didn't tell her. It's like, oh no, no, no. I don't know what they are exactly, but this is not his wife.
yeah,
It took me
so
a while.
that
Yeah,
and the coming to him when the story when Kvothe's been discovered by the man, and you know everything else basically when Chronicle turns up as well.
yeah,
Like it's
yeah.
all much
Sure.
stronger reintro to the character as
Hmm.
in terms of their essence, because this is
Yeah.
obviously it's getting all across. It's telling you the fact that he's a student, he's learning, he calls him Reshi, he struggles with his students and with his teachings. He's got that kind of
For a
fey
character that we
touch
know
about
almost
him.
nothing about, it does tell us everything we need to know. It pretty much
Yeah,
it sets up
but
everything we do know, but we don't know
exactly.
much about Bast at
But it's
all.
a pretty boring scene for its own sake, which is not. I wouldn't
Yes,
say is true of any other. There's not as much
I agree with that.
life in this. Not much, which is kind of the point, because Coates deflated at this stage. He's kind of just sort of stumping along and just going with the motions.
Yeah,
He's not feeling himself. So that, it's
yeah.
fine, but it just doesn't leave that kind of impression the way that some of the other scenes do, for their comedy, for their vibrance, for their intrigue. All that stuff.
I do
Um,
like the again the lies, or the lies with purpose, getting ready to lie tomorrow. I like the fact because when Carter came in, he was cut up, and Kvothe brought out the equipment to clean up his wounds and stitch him back up. And he trains Bast with the answer of how he learned to do that. If anyone asks, tell them my grandfather was a caravan guard who taught me how to clean and stitch a wound.
mm,
They were too shocked to ask about it tonight, but tomorrow some of them might get curious. It's that that sense of forethought and got all bases covered, and at the same time there's room to make an error, but you got to catch yourself, and I'm involving someone else in my lie. And why
mm,
is he the one in on the secret? Why does he know? What's our relationship? We
mm.
still don't know the answer to that, but whatever it is, they're together right now, and so it's well done. There are other little things that I also love the little bit about this is my favorite bit of the chapter is Bast he doesn't trust without hearing it outright that the right things have been done to dispose of the Grail. And so Kvothe goes through all the
Yeah,
things you're
exactly.
supposed to do.
Yes, I buried
But
it
my
deep.
favorite
Yes, I
bit,
made sure no one took a
yes, that's great.
souvenir. All
But
that stuff.
but my favorite bit is he said they took it to the priest and he did all the right things for all the wrong reasons.
Mm.
That's my favorite bit.
It's my
That's
favorite
my
bit as well.
favorite
That's the
bit.
bit that sticks out
Yeah,
in my head as well. I love that
yeah,
line. It tells
yeah.
you
That's
again.
really
It's that
good.
early reinforcing of I never know how much to tell you people.
Yeah,
It's that distinction between he's separate from everyone else. He knows more than everyone else. He's more experienced.
yeah.
It's highlighting all of that as well as matching the tone of the small village, small town life. Which
And
is
this
probably
is
the biggest
this
scene
is
of
where
problem with Bast's initial scene, the thing that doesn't leave it in the memory. Most of what's being discussed is external to Bast himself. It's not about him. It's not supposed to be.
it's about
It
the
shouldn't
town.
be.
Yeah,
But it's about the town.
the
It's about the
town.
setting. It's
Yeah,
about the square. It's all fill-in
I
information. It's
really
back and forth.
felt. Yeah, I really did feel. I remember because I was like, I knew you loved this thing, and I just wasn't
Mm,
loving it yet. And I was like, why? What is this? There's nothing wrong here, but I don't know what the story is. I felt very much prepared for this to be about the town, the whole book. You know what I
mm,
mean? And so when it's talking about all these people, and he says to him, like Foth says at the end of that screed that you just said about, yeah, I did this, I did that. He goes, I'm not an idiot. He goes,
mm.
I know you aren't, but I don't trust half these people to piss leeward without help. It's like, so I thought it was going to be about the townspeople and trying to protect the town, and it's not really. I would like it to actually be about that in part. I would like to see in book 3 more happen in the
Mm.
modern day story, because I really like Chronicler, and I like the pairing of him and Bast and Kvothe. I like all of them together. I would like them to do something together.
I imagine
But
if anything
that's
does
not,
happen of that type, it will be after the end of book 3, and it'll be a second story, because you can't possibly
we'll never
include
get
that
that book.
and
That'll
also
never
get all of the
happen.
early. But
Yeah,
yeah, but
yeah,
I would
yeah,
also love to see that story. I just think it needs to
yeah.
come after he's done everything else with the
I
book,
want
because there's
I
so
want the
much he needs to
story.
cover. So much he needs to
I
cover.
want I want the story to be cut off, like or not permanently, but to be interrupted so that he
Mm.
has an
By
explanation
something
for, like,
exciting, yeah.
it's not going to be 3 days. It's like,
Yeah.
and something exciting, and getting back to the story later. But anyway, then and this is again this is stuff that did not mean anything to me. I like looking at it now. I don't know how I didn't catch it, because he's literally like he's having fun with him. He wants him to go away, so he starts like fake banishing him. He's like, "Be gone, demon," Coat said. He was like,
Mm.
literally. Okay, literally, he is a demon though, or a fey creature, whatever term he wants to use.
Mm.
it's over. I somehow this didn't penetrate my thick skull. I was like, I didn't catch the clue that he's literally a demon. But he's like, so then he switches to like a made up name, and he's like Tehus and Tausa Eha. I don't know what that means. Doesn't matter really. But it's like he's speaking something. He's banishing him in this magical language. But then if you notice, he does it again, changing languages. Aroi te dena leon dena. Aroi te dena leon dena. That's the first appearance of Dena.
And this
So
author, it's not
is-
something you can ignore as being a happy coincidence.
Nope.
That was intentional. Like
It's the same spelling and everything.
Entirely too deliberate with too much of his language throughout this entirety of this book. I mean, something we never mentioned, but this is a guy who specifically searches out 7-word sentences and litters them throughout the entire book. Because why not?
Yeah, that's true.
So that this is intentional.
But also not why not. In universe, it's because he's searching for the 7 words that will make a woman fall in love with you. That's the sort of gimmick
exactly. Also, fun fact: this is 7 words if you count the hyphen as 2 put together. Just as another little thing.
Yeah. So you won't catch this unless you're actually reading it. Probably you'd have to have a hell of an ear. So Dena, like it means something in this language. We don't know what it means, but it means something. It's not just. We also kind of knew that that's not her name, right? Like her name is always changing, like the wind. The ever changing name of the wind, right? So probably it means wind, but we don't know what language this is, and we don't know what context and all that. But yeah, it's very, very good. And again, really, I should have gotten it. By earth and stone, I abjure you. Glamour be banished. It's like okay. I should have caught on. This is a fey creature. I did not. I didn't get it till much later.
Without that context, this is just a very weird scene. He's flicking cider around him like he's not even drunk. He's just stone cold sober, flicking cider.
Silences, flicking cider. I really was like, what is this? What's going on in this book?
We had very different early introductions to this story experiences together.
But this one though, I don't blame the author. I don't have a defense. This is just me being slow at this point. But I like when he is alone in his room. The description of the room, a skilled observer might notice there was something his gaze avoided. It's like it's this almost empty room. So it's like, how can you avoid looking at this thing? This is so. The room is described as austere and monkish. There's almost nothing in there. It's even got like a crappy mattress. It's barely there. He's basically like sleeping on the floor, and he's got money. That's another thing. He dumped out a bunch of coins. There were talents in there. We later find out just how poor he was, and he builds up the idea of talents being so important and so hard to get. It's clearly a fairly arbitrary amount of money, but that's how poor he was. You know what I mean? That he had nothing, like a while ago, but now he's got a bunch of money, and yet he's choosing to live this way, in this very, very, just austere fashion. But a skilled observer might notice there was something his gaze avoided, the same way you avoid meeting the eye of an old lover at a formal dinner, or that of an old enemy sitting across the room in a crowded alehouse late at night. Coat tried to relax, failed, fidgeted, sighed, shifted in his seat, and without willing it, his eyes fell on the chest at the foot of the bed. I like that last sentence. It's sort of cheeky, and it's almost going overboard with how much stuff he did. Like describing it. That almost feels less like a movie, and more specifically like something at home in animation. You can kind of see a character, like a cartoon character, doing all those things.
Split by storyboard cuts, exactly. Yeah, it's just like looking around, like looking. Nope, I'm not gonna look, and then he just vision settles, and you can just imagine like the zoom in focus. It's and again, specifically because you highlight the fact that it's an empty and monkish room, and yet still you're not looking at this one part of it. That tells you, again, very deliberate, very intentional. It tells you something is particularly different about this wooden chest, which he then goes on to describe in great detail.
He does go on, and I really like the description. I don't know. Do you want to read the whole thing? Do you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. It was made of roa, a rare heavy wood, dark as coal and smooth as polished glass. Prized by perfumers and alchemists, a piece the size of your thumb was easily worth gold. To have a chest made of it went far beyond extravagance. I love the.
I really like that.
A piece at the size of your thumb was easily worth gold. The fact that this is easily worth gold and not any of these other things, it doesn't have to give you a number, doesn't have to give you a kind of fixed amount. It just tells you exactly this is worth gold. And then obviously the more important piece, the chest was sealed 3 times. It had a lock of iron, a lock of copper, and a lock that could not be seen. Tonight the wood filled the room with the almost imperceptible aroma of citrus and quenching iron.
I love that description.
Tonight,
The almost
tonight, the word
imperceptible.
that tells you
Yeah.
magic is happening here, because why is
Yeah.
it changing? And that's huge. And
Yeah.
like you say, the lock of iron, lock of copper, a lock that could not be seen.
Yes.
It goes straight back to that kind of storybook magic rhyming kind of feel.
And
It's capturing that idea
yeah.
of magic without ever actually having to state this is a magical chest. It has this
And
enchantment on it. It was cast by this
and
mage. All that's the usual stuff you get in
yeah,
certain Tory
you
stories.
think of Cobb's story and how he won the amulet from the tinker. There's like he pays with a copper penny and an iron penny and a silver penny, and you
Mm,
would think, well, but if it was a silver lock, he would just say that, right? This is
yeah,
something else. It's not
exactly.
following that same thing. And as you say, tonight it has a smell. It doesn't always necessarily have this smell, or if it has a smell at all, maybe it's not this one. But of citrus and quenching iron is a beautiful,
Mm,
like, what is that? What is that? It's like this sort of metallic thing, but it's wooden. And what is this? And the more that you learn about like the Cathay, I think it's similar things are going on. And Denna often leaves a smell behind out of kind of nowhere, kind of that doesn't feel like it just belongs, you know? And she often has things like fruit picked out of the wrong season. It's like, how do you have this? Or like, and it's always like a very, very, very understated. It's never the point of the scene. It's just this little background stuff. I love that kind of magic. That kind of those kind of mysteries, I should say. I think Martin is also wonderful with it with the
mm,
Song of Ice and Fire.
very good.
This is
Yeah.
the only other author that like it, it feels like less obvious what any of it means half the time. It's so deeply embedded. It's like, I don't know what any of this means, but I know it means something.
Yeah,
It's
with
that
Martin, a lot
conviction
of
of
his
I know it
mysteries,
means
part of the
something.
joys, you can speculate what you assume will
Yeah,
be the actual answer. Like you don't have an
yeah,
ironclad, certainty, or maybe it's a few
hmm,
answers. You've got a scope to work with, a direction in your mind of this is probably going somewhere in this direction because, of course, it is. It makes sense, and we know Martin's
yeah,
tendencies. With this author, with Rothfuss, he has so many mysteries that all are so nebulously cast. It could be any one of a
yeah,
million options, and he specifically calls attention to the fact that that's at the point. It's not like this
yeah,
accidental stumbling into riddles. He's very carefully laying out so many separate mysteries with something in mind, but never gives you a hint of what that could be. You've got
yes,
like 50 answers to the same question, and maybe we'll get one when the third book comes along. But even if you just go by
yeah,
the mysteries alone, not even counting the plot and the story beats that have been highlighted as something that must come for this all to logically make sense within the framing that we've been given, just the mysteries alone would
yeah,
take a book 3 times the length of what we've currently got. So
yeah.
it really is
And
crazy.
it's because I mean, look how much weight is put on just the way he looks at the thing. Like how much there's a whole paragraph of that. He's like,
Mm,
when Coates' eyes fell on the chest, they did not dart quickly away. They did not slide slyly to the side as if he would pretend it wasn't there at all. But in a moment of looking, his face regained all the lines the simple pleasures of the day had slowly smoothed away. The comfort of his bottles and books was erased in a second, leaving nothing behind his eyes but emptiness and ache. For a moment, fierce longing and regret warred across his face. And again, there's no one here to see this but us.
mm.
It's just for us, you know? Then they were gone, replaced by the weary face of an innkeeper, a man who called himself Coate. He sighed again, without knowing it, and pushed himself to his feet. It was a long time before he walked past the chest to bed. Once in bed, it was a long time before he slept. It's very, very powerful, like use
Mm.
of the language. And so we do not know with anything like conviction what any of this means, but it's so clear how much it means, you know, and like
Mm.
that's perfect writing. You know, I just think that that's wonderful.
Very, very
Um,
much so.
the rest of it is sort of like where you get the answer of what happened during What Do We Do Now. They talk about specifically what was done with the remains of the demon spider. You get lovely little references to a wider world outside of the town of Noir that we don't really know what any of this means. He makes reference to the penitent king, which is a wonderful title, was
Mm.
having difficult time with rebels in Reykjavik. Only thing important of that is that it's so far away, nobody here is likely to know where that is. Doesn't really mean anything. We're predicting more taxes to come, which he refers to as a 3 bleeder year. Nice
I love that.
colloquialism,
Yeah, I love that
you know.
colloquialism. It's
Yeah,
beautiful.
yeah.
It's
It's
all basically reinforcing the state of the setting and what the tone
yeah,
of what's happening, so that we can start readying things to be bringing the wave of change in the story. So all of this is laying the groundwork for what's going to be the backdrop to the main story's kind of modern world that we're going to have the
yeah.
larger story of Quoth described in.
Yeah, it's that you get a longer in-depth description of the trader that had come through that no one bought enough from because he was charging too high a price, but now you understand and regret that you didn't buy something when you realize that the roads are dangerous, maybe with more demon spiders that you don't really want to think
Mm.
about, and hard times are coming and taxes are coming and there's fighting off in the outskirts and all this stuff. The world's getting much darker, much darker. Only the six friends had seen the thing before it was burned. One of them had been wounded, and the others had been drinking. The priest had seen it too, but it was his job to see demons.
Mm.
Demons were good for his business.
I love that.
The innkeeper had seen it too, apparently, but he wasn't from around here. He couldn't know the truth that was so apparent to everyone born and raised in this little town. Stories were told here, but they happened somewhere else. This was not a place for demons. And it goes on a little bit more. That could have been the end of the chapter,
Mm.
but it goes on a little bit more, and it's just kind of like lulling itself out, and then at the end of it, a conversation, the friends are talking, people are talking. They talked about merchants and deserters and levies and not enough salt to last the winter. They reminisced that 3 years ago, no one would have even thought of locking their doors at night, let alone barring them. The conversation took a downturn from there, and even though none of them said what they were thinking, the evening ended on a grim note. Most evenings did these days, times being what they were.
We get the close out of that style choice.
Yeah, closing out there.
Yeah, it's
It's all earned. I will say it. And I'll never stop saying it because it will always be the truth. The first time I read it, I was confused. Looking back at it now, I hardly have any complaints. I don't like the filled the room like a cold sweat line, but other than that, I think it's pretty.
When you've only got one specific like what is it, 5-6 word line to complain about, it's a pretty strong opener, especially for a story of this scale and depth. I mean, this is as we've talked about, this is a story that is unlike any other really, for how it's told and the kind of mysterious why behind it's being told. It's got a lot of intrigue to it. I'm very excited to start with the third book. But yeah, this is a perfect kind of intro for that story.
For sure. Okay, so chapter 2 is called A Beautiful Day. Now we're going to barrel through several of these chapters much more quickly than we did the first one. That was more because that was the intro to like the way that this guy writes. I do want to read this bit up front because I think this is a wonderful way to open this chapter. But from there on, we're kind of just going to discuss the business of the chapter and the ones that follow. There's not so much everything we're saying about the language is going to be consistent. It's a beautiful, evocative use of the language, So this one though, I can't pass it up. It was one of those perfect autumn days, so common in stories and so rare in the real world. The weather was warm and dry, ideal for ripening a field of wheat or corn. On both sides of the road, the trees were changing color. Tall poplars had gone buttery yellow, while the shrubby sumac, encroaching on the road, was tinged a violent red. Only the old oaks seemed reluctant to give up the summer, and their leaves remained an even mingling of gold and green. Everything said, you couldn't hope for a nicer day to have a half a dozen ex-soldiers with hunting bows relieve you of everything you owned. It's really nice, just sarcastic, way to end that.
It sets the tone of the scene and more importantly the character. Like this is a character tone shift for the second chapter here.
Yeah, and Chronicler like rolls with this really well, even though it's like he's being robbed, and so it tells you something about him and the fact that he is scared by somebody later on tells you a lot because he's not prepared for how to deal with threats from the likes of Bast, for example, even though it's no never mind to him to be robbed by 6 guys on the road. But I also just love the description of like the trees and everything. Only the old oaks seemed reluctant to give up the summer, and their leaves remained an even mingling of gold and green. To give
even
up,
just
like,
even mingling of it flows so beautiful. Even mingling of gold and green. It's such a beautiful flow to it. I love it. Most of the rest
the ripening of a field of wheat or corn, like the specific, like what is the day perfect for, like that.
And a violent red, not violet red. It's very evocative.
Violent red.
For the chapter as a whole, like the content wise, I remember it quite vividly because it's such a good character piece. It shows you the kind of character, how he's thinking, how he's the discourse between him and the criminals. The fact that they're not the kind of traditional tropey bandits. This is more of like a simple business transaction for them. They're just kind of going with the flow. They're obviously not good people because they're robbing a man, but they've got some decent.
They're principled.
They're
not.
They're
like,
leaving
totally
him a blanket. They're leaving him some money to spend because he asked, pair for your pair. I love that line. All of this is very memorable. But in terms of the prose, it's funny because you have the opening paragraph which we both appreciate as well, but the one from memory, it's the last paragraph that then sticks after that. So the first and the last are the most powerful in the writing. I love it as it finishes off with the
it is dialogue heavy, so that's part of the reason why it's not about the prose. It's almost all dialogue, but it is. This was the first chapter I liked, fully enjoyed, even when I was listening the first time.
Yeah,
because it felt like it had a clear purpose. I could follow it. I understood it, and I expected Chronicler to be one of the main characters, and to an extent, he is. He's the person that the story is being told to. He has a role to play in the present. He's nowhere in the past, in which I didn't realize that the story was going to be all about that. So when I thought it was all going to be so focalized around, like the focal point was going to be this town and he was coming there, I thought I was prepared to be swapping back and forth between many different perspectives, including his. That's not the kind of story it is. But that said, I really like Chronicler a lot.
In fact, this is actually a pretty unique exception because it's the only time you ever step away to this extent from the inn and the story being told around it, with a slight exception of Bast at times. But this is the only time you fully step away to another part of the world. You're still close because he's approaching it, but elsewhere through his lens.
The Bast stuff almost feels out of place in this book. I think it's a little bit more earned in the second book. We spend a little bit more time with Chronicler and Bast in book 2 than we do even in book 1. In book 1, the Bast stuff feels out of nowhere, but it feels more at home in the context of everything he's written so far. I kind of understand that Bast's perspective is important. The first time I was like, why am I getting Bast? The story's not his, right? And I really like Bast. He's one of my favorite characters. I don't know if he's a good person. I don't know if he's a villain. He could be, but I really like him. He's a great character.
But prosily speaking of that last paragraph, I just want to mention that because that's really cute, beautiful to me.
Sure.
Particularly in how it ties the opening paragraph and the tone and the vibe of the scene for him. As he shouldered his travel sack and satchel, Chronicler found himself feeling remarkably light-hearted. The worst had happened, and it hadn't been that bad. A breeze tussled through the trees, sending poplar leaves spinning like golden coins down onto the rutted dirt road. It was a beautiful day.
Yeah.
The worst had happened, and it hadn't been that bad. I love that sense of anxiety and dread that's been lifted from his shoulders, that kind of burden lifting from the fact that, can't, it's happened, it's almost like it ties into that piece of life luck, with Kilvin, as he mentions later, with the whole once in 7 years you have a disaster, and this one has been overdue, and it wasn't even that bad. There's a piece of kind of like of truth to that in real life, that people kind of, these things tend to happen in singles for the most part.
But it's also like it and even though he feels like he earned some of this, I mean, he spoke for himself, he to get some of that money back, he impressed them. He's got money hidden in his boot and baked in old bread and in a jar of ink, all this stuff that people wouldn't ever steal. It's like he's a smart character, he's capable. We don't know that much about him, but we know he's got some kind of he's savvy in a way. But at the same time, he was scared by something rustling through the forest, and he's just convinced himself that was nothing. And it speaks to that. He feels good. We know that it's not nothing, though. Like, it doesn't need to be nothing. Like, we know that there's demon spiders out there. So
because we as readers, like, thinking it's going to be demon spider, and it's, oh, guys, no.
Yeah.
It plays with that emotion and that material is laid down ahead of the track. We know that something could
it
happen.
Works from all sides. Yeah.
It's beautiful.
I also like that he refers to the silver talent hidden in the jar of ink as more of a luck piece. No one had ever found that because he's been robbed many times. But I want that to do something if we ever see these characters again in another book. I want that to come back. That seems like it should be important. But anyway, that was just something I didn't want
that's something that's because I don't disagree, but I never thought of it as being that important. But it's one of the things that this story does well. There's so many things you could say are important. The way it's talking about it, it's like, is that important? I don't know if it's important. It could be important. Based on the other things being important, it probably should be important. But who knows?
to call attention to that. And he has no need of money. Like, in general, we have the understanding that he's from a family of high standing. This clearly isn't all the money he owns in the world. I'm sure he has accounts and he's connected to many people. He doesn't need this thing. But that coin is a luck piece. And to call attention to it in a story where he never needs to buy anything, he's just sitting in the inn for most of the time, right? That's got to do something. He's got to do something with that silver.
Or is it just a piece of world-setting building to show that this is the kind of world
could be. I argue it should not be.
Because it's one of those things. There's so much of that in these two books where, I mean, we've talked about before Threep count of three. Like he's like, is he in on something? Is he a
That's
part of this? Is
different.
he?
We don't have time for three today.
No.
We'll get to three.
But there's so much stuff in this story that
We'll
it could
get to
be
three.
something more than it seems to be on face value. And also more important than that, not just that, but the should and the would behind it is up for debate in a way that it rarely is in other kinds of stories. Like there's arguments to be made for the strength of both possibilities. So littered with that all throughout.
The next chapter I thought we could mostly just talk about. There is a passage I want to read eventually, but this is Wood and Word. This is chapter 3. So this is where I thought we could just talk about what happens in this and what we think any of it means. It's a little bit of an odd chapter, to be honest with you. It's unusual, both in terms of its structure and also its overall place in this book. It feels quite intentional, but again, this I think is maybe the most obvious. Like the guy wasn't sure how he wanted to open this book. This feels like it might have been more at place in another draft. I don't think there's anything objectively wrong with it, but this feels like a long interlude between.
It's the time spent on it that makes it stand out to me. This when you go back and reread, this feels like I thought this maybe was a scene that happened further into the story rather after it was more of an interruption.
I think
for the
that
story
for sure.
It doesn't seem to flow with the rest of it. But again, like you say, not to say it does anything wrong. It feels odd.
It's in this chapter a lot of little things happen. A sort of mounting board that Kvothe has commissioned a woodworker in town to make some time ago, 4 months I think they say, has finally arrived. It's taken time for the guy to have the wood shipped, and it's also difficult wood to work with, and Kvothe wants to mount his sword Folly on it. I'm not quite sure everything it's setting up. It feels very intentional, and it's there clearly. To one of the most obvious things is it hints at the past that Kvothe has tried to escape from. It's keying the reader into some of those details. Bast asks questions about like, what were you thinking? Can I ask a question, Rishi? Oh, yeah, of course. Like, what were you thinking? And it's like sort of like, well, my best decisions were made when I stopped thinking and just acted. It's like, yeah, but what happened and why? We don't need to know all that. But none of that's wrong. It hints at all that in the right way. But that's interspersed with the actual interaction with the woods working guy. It's there with the goings on of like the town. This is the chapter in which a tinker comes to town, or not a tinker, sorry, a bunch of travelers barrel through their way through the town, right? And so things are busy for once, and Kvothe is almost mentioned, Kvothe is the guy you mentioned earlier. Kvothe is almost recognized by somebody, right? And he had been singing and being all jovial and everything else, and this guy, oh, you're Kvothe, is like, no, you're drunk. You're mistaking me for somebody else, and the way it's written, as you're reading it, you kind of feel like the guy could have it wrong, but then it's spelled out to you very clearly, like when Kvothe has his little aside with Bast, and he says the listen 3 times, Bast, and that's like a fairy charm that it's like, I feel like that activates perfect memory mode. Like, I'm not going to forget this, because whenever they say it, it's always super, like, he even blinks a little, like he's gone into a new mode, like a fairy mode of gotcha,
The power of 3 to it, similar to other kind of fake stories there.
Listen 3 times folklore. It's a phrase he uses a lot whenever things are super important. And also because Bast is kind of flighty and whimsical and doesn't always take things super seriously. That always puts him into, okay, no fucking around. We got to actually do something this time. So that's all interesting.
It calls forth as well with the introduction of that the man himself. That line, I saw the place in Imre where you killed him. By the fountain, the cobblestones are all shattered. Focusing on the word shattered and shattered. They say no one can mend them. That's interesting. That's really interesting because one, we haven't even seen close to what that could possibly mean. And even at the end of the second book, but also when he says shattered, is he messing it up because the magic of the power even interrupts people talking about it, or is it literally just he's drunk? There's possibilities there. Yeah,
and we also don't know who was killed. We can guess, but we do not know. There's an obvious candidate, but that he almost feels too obvious.
Or particularly because he also didn't get killed in that exact same spot before. He just got his arm broken, or not even. That's that.
True.
So it's raising
When we talk
questions
about
here.
the when we talk about the ring poem, we'll also talk about the poet killer,
Mm,
and so that there's something there's a troubling possibility there.
very troubling.
Um, yeah, but so this goes on a bit. You have the little children kind of playing like their little version of like "Ring Around the Rosie," like with like the Chandrian rhyme out there. Um, and then you have the bit that I wanted to read real quick, if I can do.
Hmm.
I like this. This is mostly just I just appreciate the words here. It's not really. I don't know. It's hard to explain what I like about this. I'll try, but I'll just read it first. So this is in the middle of all the kerfuffle, right? The children are out playing. Guests are here. We're busy for the first time in a good long while. People have ordered food. They're having baths. Water's being heated up. Drinks are being served. All that stuff. And so Coke guessed the travelers had been together a month or so, long enough to become comfortable with each other, but not long enough to be squabbling over small things. They smelled of road dust and horses. He breathed it in like perfume. Best of all was the noise. Leather creaking, men laughing, the fire cracked and spat. The women flirted. Someone even knocked over a chair. For the first time in a long while, there was no silence in the Waystone Inn. Or if there was, it was too faint to be noticed, or too well hidden. Coate was in the middle of it all, always moving like a man tending a large, complex machine. Ready with a drink, just as a person called for it. He talked and listened in the right amounts. He laughed at jokes, shook hands, smiled, and whisked coins off the bar as if he truly needed the money. Then, when the time for songs came and everyone had sung their favorites and still wanted more, Coate led them from behind the bar, clapping to keep a beat. With the fire shining in his hair, he sang Tinker Tanner, more verses than anyone had ever heard before, and no one minded in the least. I really love that whole bit.
I mean, you talk about things that you can appreciate more on second reading. That right there is one of them. That because
Yeah,
that's everything we know to have been highlighted already by the fact that he doesn't like to hum, he doesn't like music being present. Of course, there's no music there. You know that this stands out
yeah,
as a point of contrast against that alone. But when you know everything else to follow, and you start recognizing with the fire shining in his hair, that's not just a simple
yeah.
mention. That no, the fire shining because he's singing, he's exuberant, he's joyous, he's vibrant right now. And Tinker Tailor is just heavy presence in the story, and this is him coming to life, and we see that, and it very
And
quickly diminishes again.
it's hard to know where the performance or the fakery ends, and
Mm,
like the sincerity comes in. It's like surely he's having an actual good time, but he's also trying
mm,
to keep his secret identity. Like I love the use of like he whisked coins off the bar as if he truly needed the money, and he doesn't. He doesn't. He's
mm,
got plenty of money. He's got that chest, that giant, extravagant chest that's worth lots, like incalculable sum of money, kind of gold, right? I mean, he
mm,
doesn't need the money, but he's got to play the part. But it's also he's enjoying this. There's this the use of language here and the type of scene that's being portrayed. It's a great passage. It has a quality that reminds me of like John Steinbeck's writing.
mm.
It's very very
Very
similar.
much
Like
so. Good comparison
descriptions,
there.
yeah, descriptions that remind me of small town life that are tinged with a hint of something beyond the everyday. Like it's something fully within the present, but it's colored by memories of the past. It's nostalgic, and I feel like I can see like sepia tones or something. Like looking at
Mm,
it, or I feel like it's at the end of a day and the sun's still out, but it's beginning to set. It's got that flavor, that feeling. I just really love this passage. It's kind of almost feels almost throwaway, like you said, like, but on second reading, it's all important. This means a
mm.
lot.
I mean, it means a lot the
But
first
this is
reading, but yeah,
that's
it's so much
yeah,
more on second and third because
yeah,
it really does. It's a kind of the encapsulation of everything that's happening in this early stage of the story. Um, as standing as a point of contrast just within its own context, let alone when you bring everything else to it. So, yeah, I know I love this part, and also just
yeah,
simply
and it
relatable. Everyone's been in a situation where they've had that kind of, or
sure,
most people have been in a situation where they've been dancing around in like a inn or pub, in the end of a long evening, with strangers, happy strangers, live music,
yeah,
everything
and
else.
and and that's kind of like how you get to like the guy recognizing him because he was singing, so Yerkvoth, and we already kind of talked about that, and the scene, everything just kind of peters out. It goes back to it was a wonderful little bright spot in a day, and slowly it fades back to our normal terrible, melancholy reality. And I like the final sentence. There was no one around to notice. There was no one around to notice the difference. No one except Bast, who watched his master and worried and waited. So it's like, it's like, what does that mean? But that's kind of like, actually, that's after he's gone to meet with the blacksmith, isn't it? Yeah,
It's later on,
because
yeah.
yeah, so all of this happens in one chapter. It's kind of weird, but it's just that is, and that almost feels kind of like it's going nowhere, right? But he's actually he went there to get a bit of iron because he's expecting to do battle with like the demon spiders, what walk at midnight kind of a
Yeah,
thing.
which feels
So
like such an aside. That's like the first big
yeah,
fantasy action story and inciting incident beat we get in this story, but it's such an aside that you barely even remember it on
yeah.
returns to the story. It's such a non thing, and it's the introduction to how these two meet, him and Chronicler. So
Yeah, that's the next chapter. That's chapter
it's a
4, which
big
is called
moment, but it's
halfway
not
to
part of the story in
yeah,
the same way. It's part of
yeah,
plot, not story.
halfway to Noir. I can't believe he did that. Like, the town's called Nowhere. But anyway, I like it, but it does feel odd. I mean, on second reading, I like little things like he's startled when Chronicler comes in because Chronicler just sees like a guy in the woods and he's like, "Hey, it's cold out here. Maybe this guy's got something to eat. He's got a fire going. Maybe he's cooking something." It's like, "Oh, but it smells really bad. I don't want what he's eating, but maybe I can sleep here." And he spooks Quoth because Quoth's out there waiting for like the spiders, and he goes, "Hey," and he's like, "What?" He goes, "Charred body of God,"
I love
which
that
is
line.
like a yeah, that's a like you don't know what the fuck that means because you haven't had the religious like creation myth said to you yet. So you're like, charred body of God. What does
There's a
that
lot of
mean?
references to the
But yeah,
physicality of the god as an expletive, like Telus,
yeah,
tits and teeth. There's
yeah,
loads of little
yeah,
bits like that. I like that.
yeah. Yeah, my favorite is when Kelvin said "shit in God's beard"
Yeah,
or something. But like
it's like an
that's the
adjacent
best
one.
one.
Yeah,
Yeah, when he fucked something up. Yeah, I think he said it in his language, and
yeah,
it
he
was
did. Yeah, he had to
translated.
get it
Yeah,
translated. That was
but
why it was so funny.
yeah,
It was
yeah,
just,
that was
I love
funny.
it. I love Kelvin. It's one of my
Yeah,
favorite characters.
yeah, Kelvin's the best.
Mm.
I mean, Elodin's pretty cool. He's pretty
Kelvin's the
damn cool,
Hagrid of the
but
story.
Kelvin's
Is
hard
what
to.
he is.
Yes, he
He's the
is.
Hagrid of the
Yes, he
story
is.
to Elodin's. I'm not sure what Elodin would be in relevance. But yeah,
Elodin is
Elodin's Elodin. He doesn't have a
Elodin.
comparison.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. But yeah, this is just how they meet. They I was gonna say they fight the spiders. Quoth fights the spiders. He later says Chronicler sort of distracted one for a little bit when he's being charitable. So Chronicler didn't really help fight, but it's a nice little chapter. I don't really have anything to say about that
No,
one. That's kind of
it does
what
exactly what you
happened
need it to. Really solid, good,
there. Yeah,
grounded, rooted experience of the world and the touch of the fantasy, because this is the largest fantasy situation you get into in the modern world, really, until
yeah.
the changeling creature turns up. But yeah,
Chapter
it's just
five
it gets the job done.
Chapter 5 is another short little, point A to point B chapter that's called Notes. That's where Bast kind of meets Quoth as he's carrying the unconscious chronicler back into town, and
What am
Bast
I,
is
some
outraged.
dockside whore?
Yeah. You left me a
Love it.
note, and it wasn't even a good note. It was,
Which it
but
really wasn't. If you're reading this,
it
I'm
wasn't.
dead. That's it.
Yeah. I'm probably dead.
Probably dead. Yeah.
Not even I'm dead. But yeah, so at the end of it, Bast kind of helps Quoth heal up his injuries. He kind of sews him. And there's another clue I should have known. He doesn't want to touch the metal needle. He has a needle made of bone.
Mm-hmm.
He's got like, you people are primitive. I've got my own ways of doing things. Okay, so he's not human. Should have gotten that much earlier than I did. But I do like another little poem. I'm not quite sure what the relationship is. It's kind of all things and nothing specific. There's he clearly cares for Quoth, but when Quoth is like exhausted and finally falls asleep, Bast checks on him the way that the way that a mother would like a sleeping baby. He like it even says that it's like he drew Bast drew a chair alongside the bed and sat watching his master, listening to him breathe. After a moment, he reached out and brushed the unruly red hair back from his face, like a mother would with a sleeping child. Then he began to sing softly, the tune lilting and strange, almost a lullaby. How odd to watch a mortal kindle, then to dwindle day by day, knowing their bright souls are tinder, and the wind will have its way. Would I could my own fire lend. What does your flickering pretend? So it's like he doesn't want him to die. It's like, does he not want him to die soon? Does he not want him to die, period? And is he actually immortal or just extremely long lived? Because he does make reference to the fact he can be killed
Mm.
when he talks about the order of the Scythe or the Sith or the Scythy, however you're supposed to say that.
Sith.
Um, yeah, it's spelled in a way that I'm not quite sure how you should say it,
Mm.
but I know how he says it Scythe, I think, but
Yeah,
I'm not sure if that's
that's
how
how
the
I
author
read it
says
as
it.
well, like lithe.
Um, Okay, so that's chapter 6. This is the price of remembering. I always get this wrong. I always remember this as being the chapter in which he begins like testing the cipher of Chronicler and making sure that we're good to go to tell the story. I think it's just because I like this chapter title so much, The Price of Remembering. It's really good.
Mm.
And I do like this chapter, but it's like it's the one in which he has to be badgered into sharing the story. It's not the one in which he actually tests Chronicler, which was by far my favorite part of like the early book. That first time when I was reading it and I didn't quite get what it was going on, I just thought Chronicler Cipher was a really cool idea. So I'm always like misremembering which chapter title belongs to that. But
Mm.
The Price of Remembering is something else. This is the one in which Chronicler wakes up and Kvo's all mad, and he's like, why are you here and why are you bothering me? And Chronicler's like, well, I'm with Scarpy, and there's like this kind of like tug of war of like,
Mm.
oh, so you're Scarpy's apprentice? Is I'm more of his
More like a
colleague. Like,
colleague.
is it? Yeah,
It's like, excuse me,
and
sir, I'm a distinguished man. I've known all over the world.
yeah, Chronicler's balding, but I don't actually know how old he is. I've never been able to
Yeah, it's the weirdest
picture
part. I mean,
him.
we just span out for a little bit discussing the time situation with this book
Yeah,
because it's a very weird one. But the Chronicler one has always been the weirdest standout to me. The fact that he went to the university before Growth,
or
wrote
at
an
least
entire,
wrote his book
or rather,
before
yeah,
he
sorry,
went there.
wrote the entire, yeah, that's correct. Wrote the entire book before Growth. That Growth then read when he was at university. Growth left. Chronicler then attended university. So it's
Yeah, because he knows that Quoth had been there. He
yeah,
knows
yeah,
what people
exactly.
said
Yeah,
about
and
Quoth. Yeah,
also yeah, and which is perfectly fine. He could have just been a mature student, and that happens in real life. It's just unusual in the framing of the story. That's all. But also, he talked about Master Namer as well. He never says it specifically Elodine when it gets referenced later on. So there's a lot of
he
weirdness
does. Yeah,
happening
he
there.
does say Master Namer. It's a sidestep. Yeah, you're
Yeah.
right.
So the
And that
timings
could
about
mean
what's going on
nothing,
there are
but
bizarre.
yeah, it's it's all those things of like I'm convinced that there needs to be some kind of reveal. I don't know. I don't claim to know what the reveal is going to be. I could be wrong, I guess, but I would. It's to the point of like onerous or a little bit obnoxious to just be that vague about things in my mind.
Mm.
But yeah, the time is the passage of time is weird. Some of it seems to be deliberate and with purpose, and there's instances of time shenanigans going on in like the fairy world, for example, but we have very little evidence of any concrete like directions for this to go. There's a number
Mm.
of different ways in which things could go, but anyway, so Chronicler, he also reveals his real name, which is Devin Lockhees, and the name Lockhees is similar to Lackless, which
Mm.
is a
Another
name
yet
that has
very very intentional and deliberate thing that he's done.
yeah, and
So
and
begin
the
the many of the
name
millions of mysteries.
yeah the name has been noted to have changed throughout the years as well. Like we learned that I think in the over the course of book 2 that's kind of brought to light. But yeah, very very interesting stuff here. I like the flow of this conversation a lot. I don't think I would change anything about it, to be honest. I really like it. I
Mm.
just don't really want to focus on any of this language in specific detail.
It's all
Although I
basically
do
just
like,
context stuff for the setting up the stage of the why they're going to be telling the
yeah,
story. This is good character work. This is good scene setting and getting everything ready for us. But for the most part, what the kind of things we want to discuss here, we will prefer to discuss in later chapters where it's more relevant to the kind of back and forth they have. That we'll touch on a bit in the future. Yeah.
yeah. There is a bit towards the end of it, like towards the end of like nudging, like because the scene changes from like kind of like, are you okay? Oh, you're okay. Cool. I'm gonna be mean to you now. Why are you bothering me? Sort of, that's kind of the flow of the scene.
Mm.
And then as we're getting deeper into it, I've never been quite sure what to make of this language, like whether it's just metaphor or sort of poetic language, like taken to the height, or whether it actually means anything even close to literal. Um, towards the end of it, chronicler is thinking to himself, this is the difference between telling a story and being in one, the fear. And then he thinks, chronicler found himself thinking of a story he had heard, one of many, the story told of how Kvothe had gone looking for his heart's desire. He had to trick a demon to get it, but once it rested in his hand, he was forced to fight an angel to keep it. I believe it, chronicler found himself thinking. Before it was just a story, but now I can believe it. This is the face of a man who has killed an angel. And this wouldn't niggle at me if precisely zero was done with this up till
for
now.
2 books.
Yeah, I don't know what that means.
It goes back to the whole. I mean, again, we'll
There
do
are
a
many
video.
things that this could mean.
We'll do a video on what we think the trajectory of the story is going to be, because when we first did our discussions on the books as a whole, we really just didn't have. There's never been 2 books of this length and this depth and this layered mystery that have had less of a trajectory for what's going to happen past it. Because everything you learn in the early stage of this book, and even the second one, everything about the potential of what happens between the story being told and the modern day. None of it has been touched, pretty much.
See, like when we talk about things like, okay, so that it's called the King Killer Chronicle. We have ideas of who the king could be or even should be. We have ideas, at least. The Lockless Box, we have ideas for what's going on there. We have ideas for the Chandrian. We have ideas for how certain concepts can be, brought back into relevance or whatever. I have ideas for what this could mean. I have no conviction about any of it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I really, I don't know.
There's no way of narrowing down the scope to kind of to perceive the more likely possibilities, because there is no likelihood in any of this. There's only one thing we can agree on as a collective, I think, as a consensus of most of the readers who go through this, based on how everything's been framed, and we'll go into that later on in another video, I think. But it's again, even with that, lacks conviction in the sense that he could just throw a curveball, But I can't possibly imagine, unless the book's like 6 books length worth long in one, there's no way it could possibly be done justice. He needs more than one book to tell the story he needs to tell, and that's a certainty, unless he keeps it very contained within one little framing, which we'll talk about. But and even then, there's so much to do. But yeah, this I like the line that the drama of it, the fact that the imagery it evokes, the fact that it's clearly kind of giving that edge to Kvothe. This is the first time we've felt he's dangerous. This little scene here, which is important because obviously that sets up some of the larger than life details that we hear about him further into the story. So it's powerful. It's interesting to see where he goes with it, if he ever goes anywhere with it.
Yeah, I agree with that. And it's also one of the few snapshots of the fact that even if he can't deliberately do magic, he's still connected to magic because he breaks a bottle, like with the force of like his anger or something. He doesn't mean to do it, but it happens, He tries to do sympathy later in the story, or at least feigns trying. It's really hard to know what's, a play act and what's for real. But yeah, it's an interesting chapter. I like the chapter ending. I like the chronicler's serious expression returned, because Kvothe has demanded 3 days to tell this story. Turns out he needs far more. And chronicler's like, no one needs more than 2. Like the craziest guy in the world only got 2, and he's like, no, I need 3. And chronicler's serious expression returned. 3 days is quite unusual, but then again, you are Kvothe. The man who called himself Coat looked up from behind the bottles. A full-lipped smile played about his mouth. A spark was kindling behind his eyes. He seemed taller. Yes, I suppose I am, Kvothe said, and his voice had iron in it. It's a great chapter ending. I like that.
Beautiful. It's again, it dips its toe more firmly into what it's already kind of alluded to already. That distinction between who he is as Coat and who he used to be as Kvothe, and why there's a distinction there, why there's a separation, what triggers the bridge between them again. It keeps layering in more and more of that as we go throughout the story and raising those questions, and then obviously adding in the motivation of Bast and how invested they are in sorting this out or breaking the spell or whatever. Kvothe has laid over himself. It's all fascinating. It's all really good character work, and it also sets the stage for what comes in the following chapter, which obviously be the beginning of the story. After we get the kind of confirmation of how the story is being told, basically.
Yeah. So this is the last chapter that we're going to look at, actually. So chapter 7 of Beginnings and the Names of Things, which is also a really good chapter title. I don't know why I can't commit that to memory, but as I said, I'm always confusing this for the last one. But anyway, this is the one in which Kvothe tests his cipher, or tests Chronicler's cipher to see whether he can actually keep up with the story in the way that he says he can.
Which is a
And he
really
sets his
cool
ground
idea.
rules.
Yeah, really cool
Yeah,
idea.
it's
But more
very
important
cool.
than anything else, we need this, because if we don't have
Yeah.
this, then there's absolutely fuck all explaining or confirming that anything Crow says is true. We need to
Yes.
see this display of extreme competence, both for us
Yeah,
and Chronicler's believability.
to explain that, it's the fact that Kvothe is able to comprehend the cipher within 15 minutes of learning about it. That's the only confirmed demonstration of extraordinary brain power that he displays in, like, before our eyes. Otherwise, this could all be just bullshit that he's spinning out of nowhere, you know? So we'll focus on that. That's like the real substance of the scene. But before we get there, I wanted to talk about the opening. I love this opening with like the sunlight pouring in. Do you remember this? Is it language that you remember? It's like sunlight poured into the Waystone. It was a cool, fresh light, fitted for beginnings. It brushed past the miller as he set his water wheel turning for the day. It lit the forge the smith was rekindling after 4 days of cold metal work. It touched draft horses hitched to wagons and sickle blades glittering sharp and ready for the beginning of an autumn day. Inside the Waystone, the light fell on Chronicler's face and touched a beginning there, a blank page waiting for the first words of a story. The light flowed across the bar, scattered 1,000 tiny rainbow beginnings from the colored bottles, and climbed the wall toward the sword, as if searching for one final beginning. But when the light touched the sword, there were no beginnings to be seen. In fact, the light the sword reflected was dull, burnished, and ages old. Looking at it, Chronicler remembered that though it was the beginning of a day, it was also late autumn and growing colder. The sword shone with the knowledge that dawn was a small beginning compared to the ending of a season, the ending of a year. I love that language. It's just really, really good. That is almost, it's on the edge of pretentious, but
Yeah, exactly. Well, we said before, he's constantly straddling that line and never quite, I mean,
Yeah.
sometimes goes over it, but more within the context of him as a character rather than the
Yeah.
narration overall. It's perfectly balanced to give you as much as it possibly can without spilling too much into, like you say, the over the
it's
top.
got a great visual sense and flair and just a great rhythm and cadence. And I love the light flowed across the bar, scattered 1,000 tiny rainbow beginnings from the colored bottles. 1,000 tiny rainbow beginnings is like a beautiful phrase. It's just, it's really, really good.
And
I
it's
love
also
that.
very cinematic.
I just love it. And
It's that panning shot across the town, from the outside town, through the window of the inn and back in. It kind of brings you in. For someone who might have put the chapter down or put the book down between chapters and is coming back to this for the start of the final, for now, present day chapter before we dive into the story proper. It's such a beautiful kind of reintroduction.
And the weird way of describing the fact that the sword isn't quite touched by the light in the same way, you don't have to understand that. You just get you get it.
Something special about the sword, big flashing like neon sign above it, without it being a blade.
Yeah, but it's also without being able to explain why is nice, because that works for me in a way that wiping the bar in a way that you could see the guy knew many things doesn't quite work for me. This is the same kind of thing, and it works somehow because Chronicler's the one looking at the sword, and he can tell, and I like the way that he breaks this almost, just fluffy flow with Chronicler pulled his eyes away from the sword, aware that Kvothe had said something, but not knowing what. I beg your pardon? How do people normally go about relating their stories? Kvothe asked. I love that way of breaking the
reverie,
almost like stretching at the seams reverie, pulling it back to the action of the scene, and that relatable I heard something I didn't hear, what was that? And then a perfectly natural question. I don't tell my biography every day. I've never told it ever. In fact, how do people normally do this? It's a perfect way to begin what this is. I love that. And it's called of beginnings and the names of things. It's just a wonderful way to open this chapter. I love that.
You need to pair that with a chapter title like that. You can't just open it with the mundane and he poured a glass of water across the bar. It's just not going to work, is it? Yeah, no, it's very good. I like the fact that, again, we can dive back into the character of Kvothe now that the edge of danger is lifted and he's going back to his more amiable persona. He's kind of going, I don't think that'll do me.
Taciturn, but yeah.
That as well. That I don't think that will quite do for me. Nearly perfect doesn't quite suit me.
Yeah.
It's
And that's in reference to the memory when he says, he says, I normally listen and write later. He's like, no, no, no. He's like, well, I have a nearly perfect memory. It's like nearly perfect doesn't suit me. But he conveniently forgets details every now and then. So he doesn't have a perfect one either. Like, clearly he has an almost perfect one, but they're like dueling nearly perfect
yeah,
here.
exactly. And it's like,
So,
how fast can you write? Faster than the man can talk. And like the intrigue of, I'd like to see that. Like I like the there's the early camaraderie that we're getting
the
established
challenge.
here. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
like, okay, I've got a kindred spirit here. These are people that you can tell would be good friends in another lifetime or later, in perhaps even in his only story. And just runs through the test of his cipher's abilities, of his ability to write down a meaning, with the list of words. I like the word choices as well: supine, irreverent, jackdaw, quartz, lacquer, egoliant. That's and
Unusual word.
Lind had a
And the
son
Golian
here.
being a fake word.
Yeah,
Because he wanted to trip him up. Yeah, that isn't a word.
yeah.
But
Even
yeah,
that
it's like
interesting. You may stop. That has a perfect little. It's such a simple touchstone for the reader to kind of go. It's hard to break that because you're establishing kind of rhythm and a flow right within the dialogue. So it's very difficult to break that without the reader going, oh, okay, dialogue, stop, moving on to the next line. Having that be there is a perfect transitional bridge to keep the reader in the space of the scene, in the heads of the characters, and not have it be
because
like,
he was speaking to himself aloud, like, "Oh, that's
yeah,
interesting. Oh,
exactly.
you don't have to write that. You
Exactly.
can
You're
stop." Because
keeping
he
in the
was
headspace.
writing interesting.
Yeah, even though this is third person omniscient, you're rooted in the characters throughout the entirety of the story with little quirky tricks like that. I love it. It's beautiful.
He's done it in a way that somehow it feels like it's chronicler's perspective, but technically it's not quite.
Yeah.
It's certainly never Quoth's, and even when he's alone, it's outside him. It's the camera looking at him.
But at the same time, wrapped in his tendencies in a way. Like it's very much.
Sure. His language, his sensibility.
Yeah, there's a tonal bridge between the omniscient narrator and the Quoth as narrator for his own story. There's not like a disconnect where we jump away from it, which is very important because you have to have that flow between when you're drifting in and out, or you're going to break the immersion of the reader from their meta perspective. It's really well calculated.
And the language or the cipher is like he's not tracking letters per se. He's tracking the sounds that we use to form the parts of spoken speech, and that's why he can write this way as quickly as he does. And he also included the detail that conceivably, he's not sure, but conceivably he could transcribe a language he doesn't understand just by going by the phonetics, which I thought was the coolest thing that I'd read up to that point in the book the first time. I thought that's an amazing idea. I remember telling you that because I said I don't know about this book, but this is cool. And you said, yeah, well, if you like that, the book's full of stuff like that. So
yeah, which it is.
So I was like, okay, yeah.
It's this is definitely the first big moment.
I didn't like want to give up, but I could have seen myself giving up. It was like I don't quite get what this is yet, but this is cool. Like this is cool right here. Because again, it was like demon spider. Town,
yeah, no, exactly. It takes a while to get going. It is one of the. It's not a criticism of the book because it's intentional. It's very well executed. But on that first reading, whenever I'm advising people to or recommending the book to people, I always say, first of all, listen to the audiobook. Make sure it's the UK version because that's just an experience that you will not get anywhere else at all. But also, you have to say, okay, give it time. Let the story start, like because it's not all of the usual assumptions you make from the story. Oh, okay, it's going to be this. I'm not really into this. All of that falls away when he starts his story. It's a whole different experience by design. You just got to give it the time to get there and let it breathe. Because the story really does feel like it starts when Crow starts telling a story. His tale.
In many ways it does. And that's kind of the fun of this is he's kind of choosing where to start it. And some of it is grandiose, like when he says in the beginning, like sort of like it's Genesis or something.
Which is again writing that line where being up his own arse, but at the same time there's humor there. It was intentional. It was exactly. It was a joke there. So Rothfuss plays a lot of little tricks and has got some quirks all throughout the story to kind of. Because Quoth is so extra, and that's by design, his bandwidth, he can stretch the realms of plausibility with a whole tolerance for what's the word that's escaping right now? We've used it many times already.
Grandiosity. Almost.
Yeah, the writing is not
the word, but
obnoxious. The word that we used before. I can't remember the word, but P word.
Obnoxious. Yeah, sure. Pretentious.
Thank
right.
you. Sorry, it's been a long day. It's stretching the plausibility and acceptability of the pretentiousness, right? Because Quoth is who he is. He's got a lot more bandwidth, a lot more leeway there. But even when he's straining those bounds even within that context, most of the time, not always, and we'll get there at some point when we cover these in videos, most of the time he's got a little quirk like this. Like he was obviously doing it intentionally here for a joke, and it keeps keeps the charm, it keeps the tone light, it keeps a little bit of human levity to it, you know. And the fact that Chronicle laughs, and then he says, "Ha, I see you laugh. Really well then." And you know, it's a beautiful way to open the story and add some unique character to it, and keep the kind of drifting focus of as we fade to black, and like you said before, the curtains open. I really love it.
Yeah, I love the bits getting there, like when he explains that he's of the Adema Ru. He doesn't quite fully explain just in outright terms what that means. You get a fuller picture of that when he actually begins the story proper and explains what their culture is. But in this, he just bigs up the fact that, you know, before we begin, you must remember that I am of the Adema Ru. We were telling stories before Caleb Tenna burned, before there were books to write in, before there was music to play. When the first fire kindled, we Ru were spinning stories in the circle of its flickering light. Now that's probably just, you know,
over the
up his
top,
own ass, but
yeah.
but in a way that kind of every culture is. It's
exactly.
a creation story. You know,
that for one, but also it sets the stage for what he's about to come. It says, "This is how much it matters to me. This is who I am. This is how I think. This is what I feel."
Well, read your favorite bit. It's the bit after that, like when Quoth nodded to the scribe. From there on.
Oh yeah, with the nodding to chroniclers. I know your reputation as a great collector of stories and recorder of events. Quoth's eyes became hard as flint, sharp as broken glass. That said, do not presume to change a word of what I say. If I seem to wander, if I seem to stray, remember that true stories seldom take the straightest way. And it's I mean, this and what follows on, where it says, you know, this, in some ways it began when I heard her singing, and no, it began at the university, all of that stuff. What we said about the Joker before this, not only is it good in its own context, but it takes the sting out of the pretentiousness of what follows. Like he's opened with some levity, opened with some you know, charm, and now he has the breathing space to be a little bit extreme and extra in how he explains all of this. Setting the stage, and opening the curtains.
I absolutely think that there are times when he did not need to include this level of detail on some scenes, like when he's talking about what he's having for breakfast on a day where nothing happened.
For the 50th time as well.
For some reason,
it doesn't bother me on that one, but I know what you mean.
I know there's always a bit that nags at me when he's learning like magical karate and swordplay from a group of monks that live in the hills, and for some reason he draws your attention to a fat nanny goat on a hill for no reason.
It's the humor though. Again, that was one where it's like, oh, let's throw some levity into it for the sake of it. You know, let's not make me seem too much of a hero. You know, I like the bits like that. But you're right, they do come up. There are moments where there are blips of like, okay, you know, did this ingredient be including?
I do like the lyrical nature of it almost rhymes. If I seem to wander, if I seem to stray, remember that true stories seldom take the straightest way. It sounds almost like it's got a quality of almost like a prayer or like a limerick, or like, it's not a limerick, but you know what I mean? It's got this, it feels like he has heard this before. Like it's almost something passed down in his culture. Like, you know what I mean? It doesn't feel like he just rattled that off, though he could, given the way he does everything else, but it feels like that's something a little bit more precious, you know, something a little bit more specific. So
and it also like it gives not permission, but it's Rothfuss. I mean, Rothfuss pushes the boundaries of plot being just all over the place. Book 1 isn't so bad, but book 2, I mean, we go way off the beaten track of
very much. Book 2 is where I story.
And again, I enjoy almost all of it. There's bits where I question the timings and the positioning, but most part I'm with it all the way. But yeah, this guy does not follow the rules of plotting and storytelling, specifically with the trilogy in mind. And this is the excuse. This is the shield to cover that. I'll cover himself with that.
I do like that line that you already referenced, though. Like, in some ways, it began when I heard her singing, her voice twinning, mixing with my own. Her voice was like a portrait of her soul, wild as a fire, sharp as shattered glass, sweet and clean as clover. Quoth shook his head. No, it began at the university. I went to learn magic of the sort they talk about in stories. Magic like Tiborlin the Great. I wanted to learn the name of the wind. I wanted fire and lightning. I wanted answers to 10,000 questions and access to their archives. But what I found at the university was much different than a story, and I was much dismayed. But I expect the true beginning lies, you know, that he goes somewhere else. You know,
exactly.
It's like
and what led me
like,
to
and he talks about
unexpected fires at twilight, a man with
that's
eyes
a wonderful
like
sentence.
ice at the bottom of a well, the smell of blood and burning hair again. The Chandrian. He nodded to himself. Yes, I suppose that is where it all begins. This is, in many ways, a story about the Chandrian. That could have been the opener. That could have been it, but it wasn't even then. It goes on. It continues,
Yeah.
to tell the story.
Yeah, and this is where he really signed himself up for too much as an author because he hasn't cashed like many of these checks. You know what I mean? It's like these are a lot of this has happened, but some of it has not. He explains his name. He explains also how to pronounce it, which I'm sure was a note from a beta reader or an agent or an editor who said, "You got to say how to say this name." And he goes, "It's pronounced almost the same as Quoth." But it's like
mm.
you wouldn't know that just from looking at the way he spelled it. And I have heard people say it very differently, like Kavathi and Kavoth,
Oh,
and yeah, I have heard
It's
Kavathi.
Kvothe,
Yeah.
okay? It's Kvothe. It specifically highlights how it's
Uh,
spent.
yeah, but you've read it a few times until he explains it. Is the point? You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
it's fair.
Yeah, and it's easy to miss little details. For
Mm.
people. I mean, I missed Bast's entire character. He's like, I didn't understand what he was for a while. You know, um, and the Chandrian. It's like I ain't never heard of them. It's like they're on page 1. It's like no, they're not. Oh yeah, they are. They are.
And reading through this, you forget that all of the talk about Captain Burned, I know your reputation. In some ways, it was when I heard her singing. All of that comes before he even begins the start by saying, "My name is Kvothe," pronounced nearly the same. And then all of that. Even within his own story. I mean, we talked about how the larger story of the narrative of the book starts like 4 different times. He does it himself. I mean, it never
Yeah,
feels repetitive.
yeah.
It flows
But it's
so
like
well with the character.
I like everything he says here, but again, some of this I don't know what it means yet, and mostly that's okay. But I just don't know if we're ever going to get the explanation, even if he gives us book 3, because he's bitten off a lot to chew on. But he does say, names are important as they tell you a great deal about a person.
Mm.
I've had more names than anyone has a right to. The Adam called me Madri, however you say
Madre,
that,
yeah.
which Madre, which between that's the Spanish for mother, right? Wait, Madri. They called him mom. Well, they have man mothers, right? But
Ugh.
anyway, no, yeah, but they don't believe in man mothers, you silly people. But which just means fathers. But
Mm.
anyway, that's another story for another day.
Yes.
The Adam called me Madre, which, depending on how it's spoken, can mean the flame, the thunder, or the broken tree. The flame is obvious if you've ever seen me. I have red hair, bright. If I had been born a couple 100 years ago, I would probably have been burned as a demon. I keep it short, but it's unruly. When left to its own devices, it sticks up and makes me look as if I have been set afire. The thunder I attribute to a strong baritone and a great deal of stage training at an early age. I've never thought of the broken tree as very significant, although in retrospect I suppose it could be considered at least partially prophetic. My first mentor called me Alir because I was clever, and I knew it. My first real lover called me Dulator, which I don't think has happened yet
No, it hasn't.
because
But
she
it's
likes the sound
I
of it.
think based on the nature of the story that has to be an oversight, and he should have included that when he was with
That's
Valerian. It has to be that. There's no way in hell Denna, which is the only logical first lover, aside from the first woman he met after leaving the Feywild, there's no way in hell anyone that we've currently seen up to this point, aside from Valerian, who is the only one who makes sense for this, would call him Dulator.
well, he's also been around Dennis so many times that if she did it at this point, it would just be like, why would you even remember that? Just some stupid thing she
Yeah.
said one afternoon,
Yeah, it has to be just
Um,
a mission, and it happened at some point when it was in Valerian, and it was never mentioned in the story, which is fine.
like if
But
it
that has to be what
if it
happened.
was me, like in I would redact this line in current versions, just like that was a mistake. Take that out of there.
Yeah,
You know what I
or
mean? But
stick it
everything
in as
else is
something that
okay.
she calls him, in the
Yeah,
Feywild. It's the only way it makes sense.
yeah. I have been called Shadakar. That sounds like something from Dune, if I
Mm.
said that right. Lightfinger and Six String. I have been called Kvothe the Bloodless. Now we understand that one. Kvothe the Arcane. That one also makes sense. And Kvothe Kingkiller. I have earned those names, bought and paid for them. But I was brought up as Kvothe. My father once told me it meant to know. I have, of course, been called many other things, most of them uncouth, although very few were unearned. I have stolen princesses back from sleeping barrow kings. I burned down the town of Trebon. I have spent the night with Florian and left with both my sanity and my life. I was expelled from the university at a younger age than most people are allowed in. I tread paths by moonlight that others fear to speak of during day. I have talked to gods, loved women, and written songs that make the minstrels weep. You may have heard of me. this guy's such a liar. Like, I mean, you know what I mean? It's just like, what a bunch of bullshit. You know, I
Most
mean,
of it stands up, but yeah, in the context of this,
it's,
you're picturing very different things.
it's on the back of the book, and it's just like, who the fuck is this,
Yeah,
and who does he think he's
exactly. That
talking
being
to? You know?
said, I love the framing of "You may have heard of me." That's such a
Yeah, that's
beautiful
great.
fade out
Yeah,
to
it's
the
a
story.
wonderful.
I mean, he's had many.
Right.
There's many moments throughout this where he could have started the story. That is by far the best. I'm glad he chose that one.
I think Dulator has to be a mistake because he references Felurian outright.
I know.
So,
That's
you
what I
know,
was
in a
thinking, but
much
he does
cooler
that a few
way.
times. So
Yeah.
it's weird. It has to just be an error like that should have been included when he was with Fuller, and it doesn't fit any
Fuck
other way.
off, Dulator. We don't need that.
Yeah, it also sounds
Like, we don't
stupid.
need that
It
one.
sounds
It does
it
sound
doesn't fit the
stupid.
story.
It's stupid.
But
So
yeah,
there you
and
go,
then he begins the
Dulator.
story. He begins the
That's his big
story,
F.
and we move into the
Yeah.
actual tale of Quoth, which is beautiful and wonderful and very, very cool. But we don't have time for that today.
And for those of us who have been joining us with our other content, we're kind of going to cover this one like Darth Plagueis. We'll do it just in dribs and drabs over the course of however long it takes us to do it. And I mean, there might even be the occasional chapter that we skip because it sucks. Which there aren't many of those. There's one that we have to talk about, I guess, that I really don't want to.
I can't wait to talk about that. We'll tell the story of it too because that was just funny. But yeah, I hope
Anyway,
if you've been with us this long, you've enjoyed, and I look forward to more chapters to come.
Get help. Yeah, get some psychological help or something. I thought that's what you were going to say.
Yeah,
but anyway,
get a life.
Yeah.
What are you doing listening to us talk about this book? Go and read it. If you haven't read it, which is a crime if you've got this far and are still listening to this, and haven't done so, go and get the audiobook, get the UK version, listen to it. Your life will be changed if you're a fan of fiction. It's truly amazing.
Yeah. Thanks so much, guys. It's been a lot of fun. Can't wait to do this with this and many other books. I'm Matt, signing off for the day.
And I'm Callan, and I still don't have an outro. Goodbye.